Welcome to the Sleep Haunt. Tonight, we ride the endless highway where headlights stretch into the dark, and the hum of the road hides stories no map could show. These are times 9 true disturbing trucker horror stories times tales gathered from lonely fuel stops, empty motels, and miles where reality fades into something colder. Stay with me until the last mile fades into silence. And like our video, your like motivates us. If you're new, subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next drive into the dark. Now, close your eyes, breathe slow, and listen. Story number 1. On maps, the stretch looked like nothing. A straight seam through the high desert, 2 lanes, light traffic, a few service stations clinging to exits like barnacles. He'd run it dozens of times, usually at night to catch the cool air, with the sky so big the stars seemed to ride shotgun. The driver kept a steady speed, cruise control set, coffee within reach. The road murmured under the tires, a sound like breath, constant and calming. He noticed mile marker 147, because a thin cloud of moths bubbled up from the weeds as his headlights brushed the post. The bugs shimmered and were gone. He registered the number without thinking. A minute later, he passed a billboard for a diner that was 24 hours in daylight, but not now at this hour. An arrow pointed east. 8 minutes, according to the sign. He didn't need it. The tank was good, the engine ran cool, the cargo was tied secure. Night driving could feel like floating, and he liked the way the road gave him back his thoughts, in long loops. The second time he passed mile marker 147, it tapped his attention. The post leaned slightly, a rash of stickers layered on its face. He recognized none of them, but the angle felt familiar, like a face in a dream. The same moths flurried up. The same billboard slid out of the dark a mile later. Sun faded and leaning, arrow pointing away to nothing he could see. He checked his odometer, not because he believed anything was wrong, but because his stomach had done that small, quiet brace it did when a load shifted. The numbers made sense. The night kept moving. He set the radio to a low murmur. Static washed in and out, like wind through grass. The CB was quiet at that hour. He coughed, cleared his throat. His own voice sounded foreign in the cab. The heater set to a low fan nudged warm air into the cold. He cracked the window an inch and caught the dry mineral smell of the basin. The sky spread wide and black out there. But ahead, the brights carved a narrow, perfect tunnel. He focused on the center line and let the truck pull him north. When mile marker 147 stepped into the beam a third time, his scalp tightened. He was not the sort to spook. He had been snowed in at mountain passes, had coaxed a tired engine over a hump of road with nothing but patience and prayers under his breath. He was not the sort to read meaning into a moth. He glanced down at the GPS. The bar blinked, then held. The digital ribbon said he moved forward. It did not show loops. It did not show anything except the slender silver of the highway and a blue triangle creeping along. He decided to make it simple. A test. At the next sighting of 147, he would pull onto the shoulder, step out, and leave something he could not mistake. He would take the truck keys with him, coat zipped, reflective vest on, look both ways like it was midday and he was crossing a crowded street. When the post slid up again, he did exactly that. His boots touched gravel. Cold soaked into his ankles. The desert at night is soundless in a way that makes the ears expect noise, and in that silence, his truck's ticking engine seemed loud and living. He reached into the door pocket, fished out a stub of chalk he used to label straps and pallets. On the road-facing side of the post, he drew a small mark, a circle with a line through it. Nothing fancy, just something he would know was his. He capped the chalk, got back in, shut the door with soft care so the night would not crack. He rolled forward. A minute later, he passed the sign for the diner. The arrow pointed. The road kept its straight face. He watched the GPS. He watched the odometer. He breathed. He turned the radio up a notch and let a late-night blues station color the air. When the marked post appeared again, chalk circle and line bright, as if drawn an instant before, his breath went short. He did not pull over this time. He held the wheel at 10 and 2 and he said, out loud, for no reason except to hear it, "No." The cab did not answer. The radio slid into static. The moths spiraled up as if the light were rain. He passed the diner billboard. He thought of turning off toward it. The sense that anything had changed would relieve the crank of concern opening in his chest like a wrench. He watched for the exit. The ramp never came. The sign pointed toward a patch of night that had no road. A voice crackled in the CB, thin with distance. "Northbound? You got your lights on for company?" He reached for the mic. "Habit. Go ahead," he said. His voice sounded calm. Silence. Then a click. The faint impression of a chuckle, but it might have been interference. He put the mic back on its hook. The trailer hummed behind him. He imagined the strap settling. He imagined the cargo thinking slow cargo thoughts. He promised himself that at the next gas station, even if it was closed, he would pull in and breathe. He would loop around the pump islands and leave this thin sliver of road to its own ideas. Mile marker 147 rode up, almost friendly now, a repeated acquaintance at a grocery line. He passed it. He kept going. He pressed the heel of his hand against his sternum and felt the soft push of his own heart. The desert stayed the desert. The stars stayed the stars. The high cloud cover had shredded and piled like wool, making the night feel lower. He switched bands on the radio. Static. He turned it down to a hush. Wind pressed at the cab a little harder, as if a storm formed somewhere far away. Road reflectors blinked a cadence under his low beams. The engine ran steady. He figured it had to be a trick with the markers. A county maintenance crew with a sense of humor or a stubborn schedule. He'd tell the story someday, and grin, and point to the chalk he'd laid down. He would make it into something warm and harmless. At the exact moment he decided that, the phone on the dash pinged. A small alert. No signal. Then, a brief bar of reception. Then, nothing. He stared at it like it could explain itself. He thought of calling dispatch. He decided it would only make him hear his own tightness reflected back. He saw the rest area a half-mile ahead. Low buildings, a handful of empty spaces. Sodium lamps made a quiet pool of amber. He blinked at it, twice, like something between a dream and a rest. He slowed, signaled, eased onto the ramp, and coasted in. He killed the high beams. He rolled up next to the vending machines and stopped. The silence in the cab after the engine quit expanding is enormous. He listened to it. He heard his own breath. He reached for his door handle, then froze, not because of anything big, but because the payphone on the wall outside, tucked under a shed roof with a vending machine glow on its face, began to ring. He watched it through the glass of his passenger window. See a phone ring in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, after a loop of road has pulled a circle around you, and the body does a quiet clench of every muscle. It rang again, and again. He counted, because people count things when they don't know what else to do. On the seventh ring, he put his coat on and opened the door. The air touched his skin, crisp and dry. He crossed the empty lot with the sensation that sound was larger than him. The phone kept its measured cadence, as if it had all the time in the world. He touched the cold metal housing, lifted the receiver, and held it to his ear. There was no hello, no hiss. A voice spoke, smooth and level, the kind of voice you hear from a traffic update. An elevator. Not quite human. Not quite not. Set your speed at 54. Low beams only. Do not look in your mirrors. Do not stop again on the shoulder. Keep to the right lane. When you see the sun break on your passenger side, you may check your mirrors. Then the dial tone, thin and unwavering. He stood there, the receiver in his hand, hearing that small, constant whine, thinking of the chalk mark on the post. He returned the phone to its cradle. He looked toward the restroom doors as if he might find someone there with a headset and a grin. A moth knocked itself gently against the vending machine glass. The soda glow made puddles of color on the concrete. The night watched him like a quiet animal. He got back into the cab. He did not start the engine immediately. He sat with his hands on the wheel and let the cooling metal talk itself down. 54. Low beams. Do not look in your mirrors. He would have laughed at it if not for the way the voice had slid into his ear, as if it belonged there. He had heard truck stop rumors of stretches of road you didn't antagonize. This did not feel like rumor. It felt like instructions. He turned the key. The engine caught and held. He checked the gauges out of habit. Oil pressure. Temperature. Fuel. Everything fine. He set the cruise to 54. He clicked the headlights down. He glanced at the right side mirror, reflex, and his stomach dropped because he had caught the smallest movement there. Something that might have been a person stepping back into the dark. He felt heat rise in his neck. He put both hands on the wheel and eased out of the rest area. The ramp met the highway with a clean seam. He slid into the right lane and kept the truck as straight as prayer. The white line on his right glowed like a guide. The sound of the tires became the center of everything, a calm, even brush. He kept his eyes forward. A tiny muscle near his right eye twitched. When he felt the instinct to check his mirrors, he let the feeling pass like a yawn he swallowed. He passed the billboard for the diner. The arrow pointed, patient and unbothered. He did not look for an exit. The road ahead opened and closed in the shape of his headlights. When the mile marker rose out of the dark this time, he did not look to see its number. He fixed his gaze down the middle of the lane and let the post slide away like a thought he did not follow. Minutes passed like someone poured them through a funnel, slow and precise. He told himself a list of things. How to tie a load of pipe. How to count axles without thinking. How wind has a certain feel when it means rain in summer, and a different feel when it means nothing at all. He gave his mind a wide corral and let it walk. He kept his speed at 54. Somewhere behind him, something thumped softly, as if someone had set a hand against the trailer door and then removed it. A normal noise, most likely. Expansion, shifting, the small private movements of a machine in motion. He did not check. He watched the thin world ahead. The sky grew less black, more the color of charcoal. He told himself not to hurry dawn. It did not take a sunrise. It took the first narrow rinse of gray along the horizon on his right, a light like a secret. The desert began to show its shapes again. Low shrubs, dark earth, the undulation of distance. He felt that light touch the side of his face. He exhaled and did not know until then that he had been holding air in his lungs too shallow. The urge to check the mirrors fell away like a coat he could set aside. He kept to his lane, eased the truck a notch faster, clicked off cruise, and took the long slope that came next in a way that felt like relief. He looked at the odometer. The numbers had kept counting. His GPS smugly displayed a blue triangle right where it should be, as if he had never paused. He passed mile marker 151. He could not help looking. The number shone clean, almost cheerful. He passed 152. He passed a different billboard for a different diner, closed at this hour, the arrow pointing to a town he recognized, where coffee came in thick white mugs, and someone always wiped the counter in small, slow circles. By the time the sun had lifted into a pale coin and the cold lost its edge, he could see a way station ahead. He pulled in. He rolled to a stop on the scale and waited for the signal. A trooper with a careful face stepped out of the office and waved him to park. He climbed down and handed over his papers. The trooper glanced through them and did that thing where the eyes come back to the driver's face because a question has pushed forward of its own accord. "You good?" the trooper asked. "You sure you didn't have a problem back there?" "Back where?" he said, though he knew. "Between 140 and 150, the trooper said casually, as if asking about weather. "We got a couple of lights flicker on the cameras like someone pulled off and got back on. Might have been power. Might have been nothing." He said yes. He was good. Nothing to report. The trooper held his gaze a second longer, then nodded. "You did right not to stop on the shoulder in the dark," he said. "Gets slick with sand where it drifts. People think it's safe, and it's not." He pulled back onto the highway after a short check. The sun climbed higher. He felt strange for a while, like someone who had walked out of a museum into noon. Eyes not yet adjusted. He kept thinking of the ring of the payphone, the voice's careful brevity. He reached for the CB mic once to say something to whatever might be listening, then set it down again. The next time he ran that road, he made sure to hit that stretch when there was color in the sky. He kept to the right lane and took a sip of coffee and let the moths dance in daylight where you can see their wings. He saw mile marker 147 one more time. It leaned the way he remembered. He slowed just a little, not enough to disturb anyone behind him, and he looked for his mark with the chalk. He did not find it. The post was clean. Stickers flaked. The darkness in the seams of the numbers looked like charcoal dust. A few yards down the shoulder, almost at the edge of what the human eye wants to admit, He saw a small, pale shape half buried in grit. He thought of stopping. He did not. He kept rolling. He carried a stub of chalk in the door pocket for a long time afterward. He checked his mirrors only when the light was on his side. He never used the payphone at any rest area again, though he sometimes paused near them and listened, just in case. Long after, when another driver in a different state told a story about a stretch of highway that folded like paper, he nodded once and said nothing. He stayed polite to the road. He set his speed where it felt right. He learned the precise weight of not looking back. Story number 2. He took the eastern route through the mountains because the load was light and the air was cool and the grades felt kinder in the dark. The trailer was a dry van, not full. The weight sitting snug over the tandems, so the rig tracked straight. Pines climbed the slopes in a textured black, and where the rock faces came close to the shoulder, water ran in thin threads that never found their way to the river below. The pavement shone like a ribbon under his low beams. Earlier rain had rinsed the dust from everything, and now the night returned with a clean, almost metallic smell. He kept the engine brake gentle, the tatch steady, the descent measured enough to be boring. Boring was good in the mountains. Boring meant he would arrive. Mist began as a recognition rather than a sight. The beam got shorter. The reflectors brightened. The trees lost their shape and kept only the suggestion of a shoulder. He knocked a gear down without thinking, the easy muscle of habit orienting him to what the road wanted. The CB had been quiet, a few voices trading weather back at the last truck stop, an old song on AM that had bled thin through static and road noise. He had miles to go. Time spread out and unrolled like a fabric with no pattern. The first time the fog actually touched the windshield, it came in a soft breath, a handful of droplets that tried an idea and then committed. He clicked the wipers on intermittent. The sweep set a rhythm in the cab. Visibility sank. He kept his speed where it should be and watched for the way rumble strips changed tone in weather like this. On these nights, sound sat closer than sight. He could hear the road a fraction of a second before he saw it. Signs began to glow earlier than they should. A green marker lifted and vanished, that quick. Then a rectangular construction notice loomed up in amber, and then was gone. The message swallowed by milk-white air before his eyes could catch all of it. He slowed a few miles per hour. He was not in a hurry. He had gasoline blue light in his dash, and the steady drone of the reefer's distant cousins humming in his memory. Rain earlier meant crews sometimes came out in the night. A lane closure, an asphalt patch, flaggers in reflective vests under pool lights that made their faces look like people in a photograph taken with a flash. He saw another sign, and this time caught it. 1 lane ahead, follow pilot car. He blinked. Night was a strange hour for that, but not unheard of. The road bent and opened on a scenic overlook turnout, the kind with a low rock wall and a sign telling you the name of the ridge. He decided to use it like a safe shoulder to reset. He signaled, eased in, and let the rig roll to a stop under a lamp that hummed a little. The lamp made a small bubble of visibility. Beyond it, just fog and a suggestion of trees, as if the world ended 3 truck lengths away. He listened. No jackhammers, no idling rollers, no chirp of radios. Just the high, thin hiss of the mist, drifting across pavement, and the far sigh of wind, combing through needles. Barely at the edge of hearing, a river talked somewhere far down in the darkness. On the opposite side of the turnout, an electronic aero board sat on its trailer. It was turned sideways, not yet pointing anyone anywhere. Its lights were off, but the reflective chew of the panel showed a grid of circles that would shine when lit. A cone sat toppled under it. Another leaned against the rock wall. He stretched his fingers against the wheel, rolled his shoulders, and thought of coffee. Then the CB, quiet so long, cracked to life. Eastbound, you at the overlook, you're next, a voice said. Calm. Warm in that practiced way. Line up with the drums, keep it 28. No engine brake on the deck. Dim your highs. We've got fog sitting in the saddle. He looked at the dash, as if it might contain a second set of eyes that could confirm he'd heard something real. He reached for the mic out of habit, with a hand that felt ordinary. Copy, he said. You got a pilot up there? Didn't see your truck. 10-4. You'll see me when it opens, the voice replied. Not defensive, only sure. You'll want your right wheels on the buttons when we cross. When you see the stump on your right, ease left 2 feet. He frowned without deciding to. The stump? He replayed the map in his head. This particular run had a handful of markers that mattered: runaway ramp at the east end of the grade, a pull-off with a phone seized in rust, a gravel turn that went nowhere. A stump didn't feature. But local hands knew things you didn't. He had learned to listen. He floated the truck forward out of the turnout's bubble and into the white. Cones appeared like bells in a shallow river, their bands bright, their bases shadowless. They stood in a neat line, then a stagger, then narrowed the lane. He eased between them, the way he would thread a needle with gloves on. His beams slid away along wet pavement until they met fog and stopped. The radio stayed easy. He clicked his headlamps down. For a second he felt as if he had put a blanket over the truck's eyes. Then the road returned. It did not look like a work zone built today. The cone's reflective strips were scuffed and dull, more gray than bright. A few leaned at angles not quite casual. The drum at the first set of sawhorses had a crack in it repaired with tape that had long ago surrendered and peeled free like a cured scab. He passed a sign that should announce a crew's presence. Its face was blanched. The letters had washed thin. The fog made the world both enormous and 4 feet deep. Eastbound. Markers, the voice said. You'll drop over a joint. Keep it straight after that. You'll feel the deck. He felt it. A gentle thud under the tires, the sound of structure changing beneath fenders. The land did something outside the white that he could not see. He adjusted speed again for the grade, a little heavier on the foot. The engine brake remained off. He didn't want to broadcast into the forest that midnight was happening. He watched the tiny reflectors embedded along the center line float up, one at a time, and vanish under the nose. He kept the truck's right shoulder 4 inches from the edge. A world existed out there, to his right and left, made of rock and air and trees and the memory of sun, but the cab was a capsule of light, traveling through a narrow tunnel. He tried the mic again. Pilot car. What mile are we at? You got a crew name? Name's on the board on the far side, the voice said. You'll see it when you don't need it anymore. A pause, as if the speaker listened to something else layered under the hiss. We lost our set once. We don't do that now. He should have asked what set meant, but he let it pass. Something flickered in front of him. To the left of the beam, not a light of its own, more a reflection, the faintest echo of his markers bouncing off something moving ahead. He scanned and saw nothing definite. Still, there was the sense of a presence. The smell in the cab shifted, and he caught a faint whiff of hot tar, a summertime smell that did not belong in the cool and not in this hour. It went as quickly as it arrived. The grade pitched just slightly, and then rolled level, and the white around him became whiter, as if the fog had pooled in a shallow bowl. He felt, with surprising certainty, that a drop-off fell away on his right, though he could not see it. The voice came again, conversational. There's a grooved seam right of center. Don't ride it. Put your steer over it, and you'll feel it pull you around. You got buttons in your state? We call them cat's eyes. He did. He was on them now. Those little glass domes that sang under tires and talked to the hands on the wheel in their own small language. He made the truck lighter on the seam, shading left just enough that he could read the road without touching it. The fog pressed back against the windshield with a soft hiss that never rose or fell. Deck, the voice said. Easy. No brake. Just walk it. He could not see the structure, but he felt it, the old timber and steel music of it, a hollow hum through the frame. He pictured a truss because that's what he expected here before they had planned the bypass. He had crossed such bridges when he was a child riding in his uncle's farm truck, when the world was bigger and the roads all felt like they had secrets. The sound of water came up from either side where no river should be on this line, not at this elevation, not with this drop. He let the sensation be what it was and kept the wheel a fraction right of center. Far ahead, a pair of amber glints flashed and went dark. He could not tell distance. Fog killed scale. He did what the voice had asked and touched his marker lights twice. He counted to 2 and saw those same distant glints answer. On, off, on, off. It was not comfort, exactly, but it was a human exchange with something outside his bubble. He could live on such things when nights got long. Noise carries, the voice said after a silence. We go quiet by the houses. You don't see them now, but they're there. He nodded reflexively, a motion no one could see. He did not need to speak. The bridge ended with that same small structural thump. An older deck gives when it ends. Pavement returned, the particular tone of poured road, and the cones fanned a fraction wider. He thought for a second that the rock face on his left was on his right, or the other way around. The fog had a way of flipping a person's map. He trusted his hands. "Stump," the voice said. "Ease left." He did not see it. He moved the width of a tire anyway. The cone closest to his right mirror leaned as if in approval. A minute later, his right steer rolled over a handful of gravel that pattered like dry corn. That small slide he had been asked to avoid had drifted into the lane. He centered the truck again and let out the breath he did not know he had been rationing. Somewhere behind him, in the white, he thought he heard another truck in the same corridor, the distant hawk of an engine brake, ticking once and going quiet. He did not turn his head. He did not need the mirror right then. The CB whispered with an odd double, as if the speaker's voice were speaking again, a beat after itself. "You're good," it said. "Bring it steady. We've got you. You were late the last time. This time is better." The last turn came without warning. A subtle return to 2 full lanes and a broad shoulder. The fog did not end. It simply loosened around the edges. The cones stopped as if they had decided not to exist in this part of the world. He tested the engine brake with a light touch and felt the old familiar tug on the drivetrain. The voice spoke again, less official now, almost conversational. "That's you through. Take the second pullout and do your checks if you want them. Appreciate the steady hand." He reached for the mic to say thanks and found he had lifted it without knowing. "Copy. Thank you for the walk," he said. He meant it. "Would have liked that last time," the voice said. And for the first time the tone carried a note that suggested history. The channel clicked empty. He rolled on until he saw the shadow of a wide shoulder offer itself and took it. He set the brake, felt the rig set down as the trailer settled. He listened as the engine wound down, and the cab filled with the odd soft space that comes when a running truck becomes a parked one. Fog grained the light outside, as if the air were made of dust. He stepped down, boots on wet pavement, and felt cool gather in the legs of his jeans. The mountain in fog holds sound in a shallow bowl. He could hear his own breath, and the small ping of cooling metal, and, far off, the river making its way through rocks like an old conversation he had dropped into halfway through. He walked forward with his flashlight and inspected tires, tugged at a strap he knew was tight just to feel something hard in his hands, leaned and peered under for anything that did not belong. Everything belonged. He swung the light toward the road he had just come along. No cones, no arrow board. The scenic overlook sign, softened by damp, listed a bit toward the valley. The trail from the turnout to the lane looked undisturbed. The sheen of wet still even. He knew how a cone left a faint round footprint of dry under it, a ring that looked like a coin. There were none. He lifted the flashlight and played its beam along the rock wall, across the place where he thought the electronic arrow board had been. The board sat there, yes, but unhitched, dark, no newest sticker marking a contractor, and the sheet of plywood leaned against it had a spray-painted date 3 years old and ghosting away. He could have been wrong about many things, but his rig had felt a deck under it where pavement should be. Another truck rolled up out of the fog from the lower side, a newer tractor with polished wheels and a long sleeper. The driver eased to a stop with enough room to be neighborly. The CB popped. "You pulled off for a check too?" A voice asked, friendly, local, the kind of voice that baked pies and patched fences in daylight and owned a pair of gloves in every coat. He keyed his mic. "You didn't hit the one lane?" he asked. "Had a pilot walk me through. A beat." "A what?" the other driver said, and then laughed once, soft, as if trying to decide whether to tell a story. "They don't run that line anymore. Not since. The slide took it out after the river cut the bank. Bypass is your lane now. That old truss is down by the water. You smelled tar? Folks talk about that when it gets socked in. Sound bounces here. Radios too." The other driver's headlights shone into the fog and went nowhere. He thought of the bridge under his tires, the weight singing through the frame, the soft double of a voice. He did not argue. He said he would ease on. He didn't mention the stump he hadn't seen or the gravel he had missed, or how his fingers still felt the corrugated seam under the pads like a vision of touch. Back in the cab, he set his coffee down, then picked it up to keep his hands busy. Something orange had streaked the lower edge of his bumper. a smear like someone had leaned a safety barrel there and then changed their mind. He wiped it with a rag from the door pocket. The color came off chalky, flaked in his palm like a memory that didn't want to stay in one piece. He didn't know whether it meant anything. He folded the rag and set it aside. He rolled back onto the highway, and after a long, gentle stretch, the fog thinned like a curtain lifting. The trees came back into detail, each branch individual. Air cooled from damp to merely night. He found a station playing piano and a single voice, easy music that fit the hillside. The road minded its business. His shoulders found their level again and stayed there. He watched the grade signs for a break in the line of work, and saw none. The bypass curved broad and sure around the shape of the mountain like an arm put around a friend. Days later, on his return run in wide daylight, he slowed at the roadside pull-off and parked long enough to walk to the rock wall with a hard hat on the dash, casting a bright white spot across his windshield. The valley lay under him like a map. Down in the bend where the river tightened, the old truss lay slumped on its side on the gravel bar, one end in the trees, the other in the water, the paint peeled to bones. The new span he was using arced above him, beyond the ridge with clean concrete and tidy lines. He listened, and heard nothing wild in the air. He looked for cones and saw none, for fresh cuts in the asphalt and saw only the slow fading of lines Son had worked on. On a little wooden post near the wall hung a laminated sheet. Scenic overlook, closed in winter. Someone had tucked a single wildflower behind the sign. It did not seem to mean anything in particular. It still drew the eye. He toggled his marker lights twice on the way out, a habit now, tiny friendly blinks. In the middle distance, the afternoon did nothing in return. Then, almost like a coin catching sun, a twin wink answered from somewhere down in the trees. Not a light, exactly more a reflection, the color of amber swinging between leaves. He could not be sure. He did not slow. On another fog night months later, he came through late, more careful even than he had been before. He kept to the new line like it had been drawn just for him. In the thickest part of the white, when his own lights felt small, the CB breathed once, twice, and a voice began talking to someone who was not him. At the stump, "Ease left," it said. "No break on the deck. You've got it. We've got you. 2 taps, I'll see you." Another voice, a different timbre, said something brief and grateful, without ever touching a mic. He dimmed his headlights and let his own road keep him, listening without intruding, like a person passing a room in a house and hearing the soft murmur of people who knew each other well. He never chased the voice into the white again. He did not need to. He kept to the way the state built after the mountain changed its mind. And he treated the new road with the privilege of unremarkable passage. But he would nod when that stretch appeared on his route plan, as if acknowledging a neighbor on a porch. He resisted the urge to explain what he could not. He drove like the world expected him in the morning. Years later, in a different season, the pines along that grade shook off a low wind and lifted their tops into an early light that made everything look softer than it was. He came through with a heavier trailer, steel coils strapped like quiet animals asleep, and his speed like a collective agreement between him and the law. The bypass was dry, the air was clear, and the river below ran full from snowmelt. He glanced down to the bend where the old truss lay and thought he saw it shifted, farther along the gravel bar, rust greasier now, the shape of it less like a bridge and more like a sculpture of what a bridge could be. He toggled his lights twice without thinking, wrists light. The sun caught a shard of mirror somewhere on the bank, and for a second he read it as an answer, a patient hello from a place that kept doing half a job even after its tools were put away. He told no one who would not believe it. The mountain did not ask for a report. He moved loads across in every kind of weather, respectful to the grade, easy with the brake, even softer through the hours when windows excluded the rest of the world and the cab made its own country. He kept a spare safety vest folded on the seat behind him, and he could not have told you why. Sometimes he would find himself talking to the hills in a low voice, checking in with them the way a person checks on a sleeping animal. He learned the small shapes in his periphery were not for chasing, and he learned how far to trust his hands. When the fog came in deep, he would straighten his hat, breathe just a little slower, and listen. Occasionally, thin and bright as pins stuck into a cushion, a pair of winks would appear far ahead and vanish. Occasionally, the radio would open just enough for him to hear someone telling someone else what was coming. He would not speak. He would hold his lane and let the white slide by and picture a cone under each corner of his mirrors, and the sound of timbers under tires where no timbers were. The mountain went on being the mountain. The road went on learning how to go around it, and he went on between them with the quiet of someone who had once been guided across something he should not have had to cross, and had come out on the other side anyway. Story number 3. He ran the plains at night because the wind laid down, and the road unspooled, smooth and straight. The sky above the wheat fields kept a low, heavy ceiling of cloud that flashed once in a while with sheet lightning, a soundless flicker that painted fence lines in pale blue for a heartbeat. The radio carried a weatherman's calm voice, talking about storms that would be someone else's problem by morning. He could smell rain that hadn't arrived yet. The truck ran true, but a faint shiver had crept into the right front at certain speeds, not enough to worry him, enough to make him watch the temperature on his hub with a little more attention. He told himself he would pull in when he found a place with light and cover, and let the squall go by while someone smarter with wrenches than he was looked at his tire. A sign rose out of the dark like a practical thought. 24. HR truck. Service alignment tires diesel. The arrow pointed to a low metal building set back from the highway, behind a chain-link fence. A string of sodium lamps kept a pool of amber over a cracked lot. 2 bays stood open, a third closed. Someone had painted numbers over the bay doors with a steady hand, and a patience that suggested this was a place that liked things in their lane. A bell wire across the drive thunked once when his tires crossed it, and a light over a side door clicked on. He eased in and parked where a sign said, "Wait here," that simple. The door opened and a woman stepped into the light with her keys in one hand and a paper cup of coffee in the other. She wore coveralls with a name stitched on in white script, the sort of uniform that endured years of spills and washes. Her hair was braided, tucked up like a rope coil at the back of her head. She carried herself like she hadn't rushed in a decade but could move fast if she had to. She looked at the truck like it was a person who had arrived late to a quiet church. "You're not the first tonight," she said through the window, voice steady and Midwestern flat. "You got a vibration or a pull?" "Vibration," he said through his open window. "Right front. Doesn't do it all the time." "We'll put you in 3, she said. "Pull up on the yellow line, kill your engine, leave your markers on. Crack your window an inch, and keep your belt fastened. I'll bring the clipboard. Green light above the door steady means you can step out. If it blinks, you stay put. It'll be another truck and we don't want the cross drafts." He nodded. He'd been to shops that had rules and to shops that lived by shrugs. He preferred the ones that had rules. He eased his rig into bay 3 slow as a sigh, aligning the steer with the paint stripe that the rain had worn to a pale ghost of yellow. The floor inside was clean in the way a shop floor can be clean, swept and stained and honest about its use. A green light above the bay door blinked once, then went darker again. He set the brake and the truck settled into itself with that familiar series of small ticks and creaks like a rest after a long day. He shut down. Marker lights threw a dull glow against the bay's white walls. The woman appeared at his passenger side and held up the clipboard. He rolled the window down far enough to take it. A page was clipped to the top, rules printed in simple black letters. No fuss. He read them because she watched him until he did. Remain in the cab until the green light is steady. Keep your seatbelt fastened at all times in the bay. Do not open doors if you hear knocks from the sleeper or trailer. If the shop phone rings and you recognize your own voice, do not pick up. When the magnet board reads move, roll forward exactly 6 feet and stop. Do not reverse. Keep your headlights off. Markers only. Do not look toward bay 1 while the welder is in use. He felt the corner of his mouth tug without his permission. It was good-natured, not mocking. He had been in places that taped up lists like this after one bad night, and the list stuck for years because the memory did. "You get a lot of folks who don't listen?" he asked. "Fewer than we used to," she said. "If you think you won't, I will let you stand out there now and look at a picture that changed my mind. You want me to check your hub temp while you sit? I'll bring the gun." "Please," he said. She nodded and moved away, her boots soft on the concrete. Rain began like a hand tapping quietly on the roof, and then opened into a steady pour, drumming the metal building, washing the dust down the drains that lined the bays. He liked that sound, the way it made the cab feel wrapped. The radio went low and indecipherable. then found a station that played piano. He set the mic back in its cradle, cracked the driver's window as instructed, and felt a small draft that kept the glass from fogging. He clicked his markers once in reflex and let his hands rest where they fell. The woman returned with an infrared thermometer, aimed, and called out numbers through the glass. Left front 87, right front 99. You feel it only at certain speeds? Between 55 and 60, he said. We'll look at the belt and the tire, she said, matter of fact. Might be a little separation. Might be a belt starting to walk. I'll chalk your lug nuts. She said it like she'd been doing it longer than he'd been alive, and would do it after everyone else went home. He felt the vibration less now that he was parked, but he remembered it in his hands. He settled into stillness the way a person settles into a chair by a window to listen to rain. He watched the signal light above the door. It glowed red, a steady idle. He looked to his left and saw bay 1 inch the far corner. A welding curtain had been drawn across its opening, a heavy red that made the light behind it seem warmer than it was. A sign above it read, "Welding eye protection required." No one moved behind the curtain. It was as still as a painting. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang, one of those deep shop bells with a lot of voice behind it. He thought of the line on the rule sheet and felt dumb for thinking anything about it at all. The phone rang again, then stopped. An old clock on the office wall clicked at the top of the minute like a switch breaking. A soft knock came from the back of the cab. Not the door. Lower. It sounded like the space under the mattress, the thin wall where the step rose up. 3 knocks. Not urgent, not careless. He stared at the sleeper curtain without moving. He was alone. He had been alone at his last stop. Everything in the sleeper was the way he left it. Cap on the hook, jacket on the back of the driver's seat. Duffel, unzipped, because he'd gotten clean socks. Another 3 knocks. He could have said he heard the rain do it, a drip finding the same hollow 3 times. He wanted to say that. The rule sheet lay face up on the passenger seat, quiet as a piece of paper can be. He drew a breath in through his nose and let it out through his mouth and didn't move. Footsteps moved across the bay floor outside, the steady walk of someone who knows where the drains are and where the slick spots form. The woman's boots paused near his front tire. He saw her hand slap a dab of paint across a lug nut, quick, workmanlike markers she'd check after a mile of rolling in the morning. She didn't look up at him. A few seconds later, the magnet board bolted to the wall across from him flipped a little metal card with a flick that made the hair rise along his arm. The card read, "Move." He repeated the rule in his head. Exactly 6 feet. He put the key in, turned it to accessory. He didn't bring the engine to life. He tapped the brake off, nudged at the throttle enough to let the rig creep, then pressed down again and set it with care. He counted out 6 feet in his head but still watched the streak he'd made with his tire against a rust line in the floor. He stopped. The board flipped back to wait. He put the brake in again, and the truck gave that small sigh he liked, the one that acknowledged cooperation. Somewhere to his left, behind the welding curtain, something started up a faint buzz that he wanted to call a welder but wasn't. It sounded like rain had found electricity and wanted to taste it. Light slid along the bottom edge of the curtain like fingers along a piano. He looked away because the list asked him to. He pictured the roads he knew best, the ones that felt like home without being at home. He pictured a diner with heavy mugs and a waitress who called everyone by what they were driving. He pictured the belt inside the right front tire, a long loop under tension, doing what it could for as long as it could do it. The phone rang again, closer this time. Not in the office, but at the desk to his right. The one with the parts catalog spread across it, and a calendar with a horse on it. He stared at it to be sure his eyes weren't playing him. It did ring. The tiny red message light blinked once, as if it knew something before the line decided to share it. The ring stopped. The message light blinked again, then steadied. A click, as if someone had picked up somewhere else and hung up wrong. He told himself a story about a second shift in back, a shop truck with a dead battery, someone doing 3 things at once, and not one thing well. Another set of knocks came from the trailer, forward, near the landing gear. Different rhythm than the sleeper. These were softer, like knuckles against metal dulled by rain. He knew the sound of his own trailer. He knew how it ticked when cooling, how straps sang minute songs in crosswinds, how the belly of it could broadcast gravel tapping the underside like rain. He knew what these knocks were not. He left his hands resting on his thighs and let them be hands. The CB hissed and threw words into the air that didn't belong to anyone in particular. A voice like gravel in a tumbler, older, a Midland accent, the kind of talk that can recite counties without looking at a map. Belt fast, it said. Not to him exactly. Markers. Don't open. Then a crack of static erased the rest. He reached for the mic and then let it hang. He was not on a channel he needed to defend. "Storm sitting on us," the woman called through the rain, loud enough to be heard without pushing. "You want coffee? I'll set a cup by your step." He considered it, the warmth of it, his hands around a cup. "I'm good," he said. He felt silly saying that to a door, but he didn't want to open anything. He imagined the cup steaming by his step. He imagined the rain pushing its smell into the cab if he opened his door. He pictured it exactly enough that it felt like he had done it, and the feeling satisfied something that wanted to reach for a handle. The magnet board flipped to move again. He rolled forward another 6 feet and stopped as careful as ever. The support beams overhead made their own small guitar out of the rain, humming to a single note. The green light above the bay door blinked once, twice. Not steady. He watched it until his eyes watered and blinked for him. He did not step out. The horse on the calendar looked a different direction than it had a moment ago, and then when he looked again, it didn't. He rubbed his nose with the back of his wrist, an old habit he had when weather changed. From the corner of his eye, he thought he saw someone pass the welding curtain on the inside, a shape more than a person, a change in the density of the light. He kept his eyes on the dash. The radio fumbled with a station and produced an advertisement in a voice he knew because he had heard that exact spot on 100 Nights windshield repair at exit 31. Mention this ad and save 10. The voice read the number and said his name at the end, not the company. His name. He told himself it was coincidence. The spot probably pulled the first name from a list and ran it to feel personal. He let the thought lie down in his head and not get up again. Rain softened. Its sound thinned. Thunder rolled far away like an empty train. The woman's boot steps came back over concrete. He could not tell where she was. The shop phone rang again. The deep bell. This time it rang once and then cut off as if a hand had rested on the cradle and then changed its mind. His cell phone lit on the dash without sound, a blocked number calling. He let it roll. It went dark. The dash ambient light shaded from cool to warm as the shop's power shifted something somewhere. He set his hand on the wheel and found himself counting to 8 and starting over. Not for any reason except the body sometimes needs small work to do when it must not do larger work. The green light flipped steady, crisp, and even like a command. The rain weakened to a patter. The magnet board read wait. The woman's face appeared at his passenger window, softer in the dim now, the edges of her braided hair silver. She lifted a hand and mimed the motion of unbuckling a belt with deliberate slowness. He thumbed his buckle release and felt the strap retract across his chest, the sensation curiously intimate after so long in a seat. She tapped twice on the glass and mouthed the word, "Okay," and he cracked the door and stepped out into the bay with a care that felt like politeness. Everything smelled like rain and rubber and clean metal. He could see his own marker lights reflected in the gloss of the shop floor. The woman stepped back to give him space and nodded toward his right front. "She's warm," she said. "Not scary. We'll break the bead and look. Might be a bubble coming up." Belt wants to twist sometimes when it's had the same job too long. He followed her to the tire machine because it felt right, to stand where he could see the work that mattered. He looked down as they walked and noticed the faintest tracks of something across the floor. He would have called water. If water made patterns like that, two narrow, almost parallel lines that started near Bay 1 and ended against the far wall, as if a dolly had been rolled and rolled back. He didn't think about it much, and then he did. And then he let it go. She set the tire on the machine and worked it with easy strength, not hurried, not slow, hands sure. When the tire came off, she turned it so he could see. The inside face had a pale, almost imperceptible wave running around it, a suggestion more than a damage. She ran her hand along it, and it gave under her fingers in a way that told him what he needed to know without an explanation he'd forget. "We can run you," she said, "but I don't like it. You'll carry that hum all night. We got your size. Price'll be what it is." "Do it," he said. In a place like this, The cost felt like time purchased back from something you didn't want to explain later to anyone. He stood while she mounted a new tire, balanced it, chalked the mark, tightened lugs with the easy machine rhythm of someone who had decided a long time ago to learn the difference between tight and tight enough. He looked past her shoulder toward Bay 1. The curtain did not move now. He could see his own shapes reflected in the red sheen, a soft echo. The old rule on the clipboard came back to him again, and he realized, without wanting to, that he had not once looked straight at Bay 1 while he had sat in the cab. Not even once. He did not want to now. He kept his eyes on the well-lit work and the reassuring clatter and shop smell that said the world could be fixed if you put the right tools to it. "You run this place alone at night?" he asked in the easy space, while she tightened the last nut by hand to feel it and nodded to herself. "Nights mostly take care of themselves," she said. "We got a day crew that likes sunshine. I like the weather that comes when everyone else is asleep." It wasn't a refusal to answer. It felt like the answer. She set her wrench down and wiped her hands on a rag with that same careful economy. "You like biscuits? Day crew brings biscuits. Night crew gets coffee." The rain pinned gently at the bay door like a guest who has made peace with leaving. He walked back to the cab and did a quick check, a habit that had saved him from stupid things more than once. Keys where they needed to be. Bag where he left it. Paperwork in the binder. Everything was the same as it had been, except the clipboard. It lay now on the step, its rules folded back. A smaller note had been tucked under the clip, handwritten in the same simple letters, "Thank you for not opening." He lifted the note without quite smiling and left it where it had been, as if it belonged to the place more than it belonged to him. He climbed into the cab, buckled up, felt the lurch when the belt set, and started the engine. The green light glowed steady and easy. The magnet board read "Move" one last time. He rolled forward like he had been asked to before, and the floor under him changed tone like wood under carpet, though he would have sworn it was all concrete. At the counter he paid. The receipt printer made its small, serrated song. The receipt listed a line item that read "After Hars Fee," and another that read "Night Watch." He didn't ask about it. He had a sense that if he asked, the answer would be an old story with too many names, and he would think about it when he did not want to. "What's Bay 1's deal?" he said instead, casual, like asking about a tool he didn't know how to use. She leaned against the counter and considered the question as if it had weight. "That one faces the highway," she said finally. "At night the glass isn't glass. It does a thing with light. We don't use it. People try to do two things at once when the weather sits on them, and sometimes they forget which side of a window they're on. We keep the curtain for the seen and the unseen." He signed his name. The paper sucked his pen a little because of the damp. He tucked his copy into his logbook and stood there a moment listening to rain thin out and the cooling tick of his own engine. He wanted to ask her about the knocks and the voices that sounded like his own voice dipped in some other frequency. He didn't. The list had not told him to report about it. It had told him what to do, and he had done it, and the night felt different because of it. Out in the lot, the air smelled like wheat waking up. The storm drifted south and left the north clean and wide. He rolled out past the bell wire, and it dinged as friendly on the way out as it had on the way in. The road received him like it always did, a long, straight permission. The vibration was gone. He felt it gone. The right front was quiet, as a hand laid flat in a blessing. At a truck stop 100 miles along, he topped off and stood under an awning listening to gas pumps talk to themselves and hearing the distant low roll of someone else's thunder. Another driver behind a row of windshield wipers said, as if talking to himself, "You ever use that shop back there? The one with the little fence and the old horse calendar?" He said he had. The other man nodded at the rain and made a face like he was trying to remember whether a thing had really happened. "When I went in there daytime, the kid at the desk said they don't do nights. Said they never did. Said they just leave a drop box after 8 and you're on your own. I told him I paid the night woman cash one time, and he told me I must be thinking of the other side of town. There isn't another side of town." He stretched his back in a way that made old bones speak. Road'll make a man's memory playful. He laughed in a way that did not require anyone else to laugh with him. He ran that stretch again weeks later in clear weather, sun a smear of gold that made the fields look like coins scattered to the horizon. He stopped in on purpose. The lot was the same. The bell wire dinged. Inside, the counter had a different calendar with a different horse. The woman was not there. A young man with sleeves rolled up and hair cut close looked up and said, "You need an oil change or what?" In a tone that said he could happily do either or neither. He paid for a jug of coolant and stood very still, the way a person stands when an old song on the radio opens a door in the head. "You work nights?" he asked. The young man laughed and shook his head. "Not a chance. We close at 8. This is not a 24 type of place. You should try Petro down the interstate." He nodded and did not argue. He stepped outside and stood by Bay 3 and looked up. There was a mount above the door where a light could have been. It had no bulb. The curtain at Bay 1 was rolled to one side in a messy bundle, like a thing that fought being put away. He put his hand on the bay door in a casual, maybe superstitious tap the way a person touches the hood of an old, faithful car. The metal felt warm in the Sunday. On the way out, he checked his mirror and saw the lot in its little pool of noon. A bird hopped in the puddle that rain had left, bobbing its head like it would argue any point you liked. Beyond the fence, the wheat moved in a slow wave. He put the radio on and found an AM station that read farm reports and birthdays. He let the day take him. Months later, after midnight and with frost on the edges of things, he caught a run of static and then a voice on the CB while he was crossing a different state entirely. "Markers on," it said. A woman's voice this time, calm and plain. "Seat belt on. Don't open for knocks. 6 feet when the board says, easy now." It wasn't talking to him. He felt it like you feel a hand on a shoulder that isn't yours. He turned the volume down to a hush and listened like you listen at the door of a room where someone is telling someone else how to get through a night. He carried the receipt from that place longer than he meant to, tucked in with papers he needed every day. The line that read Night Watch faded to gray, and then to a suggestion. He would touch the paper sometimes to remind himself of the way the green light had steadied at the right moment, and how the rain had sounded under a metal roof, and how somebody's good checklist had been enough to keep him in his seat when the knocks came, when the voice that could have been his voice put a shape in the air like a suggestion. He liked how small the rules were compared to the size of the night, and how the night went on behaving itself when he followed them. Story number 4. He crossed the high plateau where the wind had room to run, the kind of stretch where a driver could set a steady speed and feel the horizon keep its promise. The night was clear, stars sharp as pins, the air dry enough to ring when the tires hummed. He liked this line. Sagebrush and even rose, a sky so big it seemed to hold its breath. An occasional freight gliding along the distant rails, with a horn that sounded like memory. The dashboard made a small country of light. The miles were honest. His transponder chirped green bypass granted. He let the sound float, and then, a half-mile later, saw a message in amber letters ahead. Way station. Open, all trucks must enter. The arrow blinked left. The decision was not difficult. Sign beats gadget. He signaled, eased into the deceleration lane, and felt the crosswind lift against the trailer's side like a hand testing a door. The way station sat low and square under a canopy with a faded state seal on its end. Sodium lamps made circles of gold around the lanes. A flag hung limp on its pole. Sprinkled gravel kept the shoulder honest. He rolled toward the way-in-motion lane and watched the dotted outlines of a truck painted on the pavement glide under the bumper. Far ahead, the little brick-scale house held a lit rectangle of window that didn't show much of anything behind the tint. No other trucks stood waiting. The place held the sound of fluorescent lights and an air conditioner's mild, tireless breath. A roadside reader blinked at him, the old style with amber dots that seemed to hold meaning inside each circle. Primary scale stop at line. He did, gentle and exact, the front bumper meeting the white stripe like a handshake. The platform settled under him, not moving, but the way weight feels weight. He set the parking brake and watched the trailer give that small shift it always did when everything decided to agree. An intercom crackled, surprised to be used. Driver on lane 2, a voice said. Calm. Not unfriendly. Set your brake. Lights to markers only. Window open 3 inches. He could have obeyed before being told. He had already done it. He rolled the glass down, felt the cool night come in with the smell of metal warmed by day and cold from underneath. He flicked his lights. The intercom waited a second and spoke again. Thank you, it said like a habit, and then, Call sign? Dot numbers on my door, he said, and then added out of politeness his name. Copy, Daniel, the voice replied, not like a stranger trying the syllables on, but like someone who'd used it before. The ease of it grazed something in his chest. He looked toward the window, hoping to catch a face, a silhouette, some sign of the person behind the speaker. All he saw was his own truck reflected, and, in the corner, the red eye of a coffee maker. His transponder chirped again, the same friendly green it had given out on the highway. He could see the big sign by the roadside in his mirror. Bypass, thank you. The station's inner sign, the one that ought to have told him to pull off or pull around, held its steady amber. Wait. Reading, the voice said. A pause. The little printer inside the house rattled like a dragonfly. Gross is good. Spread is fine. Bring your steers forward. 1 foot. The tone used a homely measure on purpose, a human correction instead of inches that might invite overthinking. He lifted off the brake, eased the truck that careful foot, set it again. The platform thunked softly, a dry, reassuring sound. A train sang a far song, and the wind changed its mind. The printer murmured again. Hold there, the voice said. Marker lights, tap twice. He did, out of curiosity as much as compliance. He watched his own amber markers wink against the pale walls, and felt a blink somewhere far down the road. Answer in that strange way, reflections can seem like replies. The intercom spoke a little softer. Appreciate it. A pause that held more weather than time. Insects found the lamps and wrote their tiny circles in the cones of light. A small tumbleweed that had not had the good sense to stop earlier made a brave attempt at crossing the lane and caught on a drainage grate like a note pinned to a bulletin board. The air conditioner breathed. His truck ticked once, as something cooled a fraction of a degree. Daniel, the voice said, and he had to remind himself that the intercom didn't know him in any way that mattered. You're going to hold for a minute. He didn't argue. It wasn't his style. Copy, he said, and sat with his hands easy on the wheel. He looked at the clock on the dash without meaning to. He watched the seconds do their work, and then looked away. Waiting wasn't hard. The station made a kind of quiet. He listened to it. The big sign at the entrance changed a message in that slow, steady dot-by-dot way. Crosswinds. Use caution. A weather thing, not news. The plateau had a way of doing that, sending gusts that made a trailer lean like a tree in a storm, and then forget the whole mood 2 minutes later. He breathed and let his shoulders settle. Up ahead on the highway, beyond the chain link, he saw the movement first as a suggestion, a ripple in the dark like someone had passed a hand across the world. Then there it was, a herd moving across the pavement in the amber wash of another set of headlights. Four-legged, big, deliberate. Elk, he realized. The scale of them beyond deer. The silver of antlers catching light like branches dipped in moon. The first few were already on the far side, slipping into sage as if this had always been their land and the road a new idea. Another truck's brake lights bloomed on the grade. Red reflected back at him in a blink that ghosted the station's windows. Everyone out there was just handling it. But it was a lot of animal, a lot of mass, a lot of chance. The intercom spoke so softly, he had to lean toward it. Hold. He did. He could have rolled on, he had weight in hand. The sign on the highway had told him he could keep going. But it felt like standing on a porch while weather passed. He recognized the sense of being kept out of the way of something larger than him. The herd moved with purpose, and then a straggler, smaller, uncertain, hopped sideways in the light, then followed. Nothing dramatic happened, but it could have, and part of his brain played the film anyway because that was what brains do. Clear, the voice said after a minute that stretched out like a ribbon, and then snapped clean. The printer in the house signed its name again. When the big sign says proceed, you'll go. No rush. Easy back into it. 35 on the ramp. He watched the entrance sign, that amber rectangle with its little mind, shift from crosswinds to proceed in the slow, patient way it had done everything. He lifted the parking brake, felt his truck ready itself in that small, living way the machine always did when asked. He put his window up halfway, not all the way, as if leaving room for the voice to still live there. He rolled. At the scale house window, nothing looked different. The coffee maker's red eye shone. A soft green LED blinked on a rack of radios. Tuesday's newspaper, or a newspaper that looked like a Tuesday, lay folded under the edge of a stapler. A potted plant whose time had possibly come and gone stood doggedly upright, faithful to its role. He wanted to lift 2 fingers in thanks, the way one does on a 2-lane when a car lets you pass. He kept his hands where they were, and did his thanks without moving. The merge lane gave him room. He kept 35 until the arrow on the sign asked for more. He fed the throttle like he was feeding a timid animal. Back on the main line he saw it. The scuff of hooves across the asphalt, the slight scatter of mud from a shoulder, a tuft of something caught in a crack that was only grass, but looked like it might be something more if you needed it to be. Ahead, tail lights breathed and settled. The road accepted its own surprise and went back to forgetting. A few miles along, a state trooper sat in the median, lights off, the silhouette of the car, a patient neighbor. When he came even, the trooper pulled out, eased up alongside, kept pace for a heartbeat, then dropped back and slid behind his trailer. With a brief, polite flash of blues, not a demand, a request, he signaled, moved to the shoulder where it widened to gravel, and stopped. The trooper walked up, hat brim the shape of authority without menace, gloved hands visible, steps careful. The air between them was the kind of chilled clean that makes a person believe in distant mountains. The trooper gestured with 2 fingers to lower the window, and he did. "You good?" the trooper asked, simple as weather talk. "You didn't see anything jump right in front of you?" "No," he said, which was true. "Heard you had movement up there." He angled his chin back toward the place where the highway bent and the land stayed flat. "Every spring and fall," the trooper said, mouth tipping like a man who had a whole catalog of stories about animals with their own calendars. "We hit the switch on the sign when someone calls. Takes it a minute to say what it needs to say." He shifted his weight, as if deciding whether to say anything else, and then did. "Appreciate you taking the ramp. We've got folks who ride the green on the dash like a commandment." Sign said enter, he said. "I was happy to be told what to do." The trooper's eyes flicked toward his trailer, as if counting straps, counting axles, doing the quiet inventory people with long attention develop. "Station's been off and on," the trooper added, as if continuing a conversation he had been having with himself. "They're moving it down the road next year. House there now is a temp. Been a temp a long time." He leaned back a fraction to go. "Roll safe. Wind gets frisky in the notch." He merged back with the ease that comes after an interruption that feels more like a courtesy than a correction. The road unlatched for him and let him through. He thought of the voice on the intercom, saying his name as if it had known him longer than a minute. He thought of that printer's polite song and the slip it always produced. At the truck stop an hour later, he found a place under a light and set his brake. The silver of the sodium lamp made the world a movie set for a minute, flat and bright. He shuffled paperwork, not because he had to, but because it settled the mind after the long run of night. He pulled the way ticket out of the stack to log it. The paper wasn't the thermal strip most stations use now. It had edges with little square holes in them, the perforations of an old dot matrix feed. The letters rode slightly above the paper, ink that had laid down with small insistence. Date, 3/26. Time, 2:38. He looked at the clock on his dash. 2:38 glowed back at him, precise. He smiled at the neatness of it and then frowned, because the permit number in the corner read a format he hadn't seen in years, and the masthead at the top was not the state's current emblem, but an older design he remembered from a license plate he'd had on a truck 2 owners ago. The signature line at the bottom had a name beneath it in small block letters, L. Gauthier Waymaster. He thought of leaving it at that. A slip is a slip. It balanced his records. He logged the weights in his book and sipped coffee that had cooled into the lukewarm that isn't great but isn't bad. He rubbed the pad of his thumb across the corner of the paper and felt the tiny tooth of the perforation. At the counter inside, the clerk scanned his fuel card and asked the kind of questions clerks always ask at that hour. Need a receipt? Want a shower code? He made answers without thinking. His mind kept passing a hand over the scale house window and the empty shape behind it, as if smoothing a wrinkle in a bedspread that would not lie flat. On his way out, a bulletin board caught his eye only because of its color. Someone had pinned up a flyer with a picture of an elk on it, a silhouette against an evening sky. It was a state wildlife advisory, neat, friendly, careful to use words like migration and crossing patterns. At the bottom, a small note. Please report nighttime crossings to the Highway Patrol Dispatch. The number was the same one on the trooper's car. Below it, Someone had stapled a small laminated card, a memorial from years earlier. In appreciation of Waymaster Louis Gautier for years of night shift service, a black ribbon crossed a corner, not for drama, for memory. The date below the name was a decade old. He did not connect anything more than a line and a circle. A man can be named anything, and a printer can eat any kind of paper. He put the card back where it was, because it wasn't his, and also because it felt like the right place for it. Outside, the wind had changed again, and the flag at the station up the road now moved like a hand, saying hello and goodbye at the same time. On his return trip at noon 2 days later, the way station sat in a perfectly ordinary version of itself. The big sign read closed. The house's window reflected daytime so strongly, he could only see his own truck. A new sign had been added on the shoulder, a portable one, advising of wildlife activity in the next 10 miles. A crew in high-vis vests adjusted its legs to keep it level. The trooper in charge of the crew lifted a hand in the universal, neighborly way you lift a hand to someone you have not decided to know. He eased past and let the afternoon take its shape around him. He kept the way ticket in his folder longer than he meant to. The perforations grew soft where he handled it. The ink didn't fade. Occasionally, on nights when the horizon was too steady and the mind wanted a target, he would take the paper out and press his thumb over the name at the bottom, not to prove anything, just to feel the bump of letters laid by a needle and ink instead of a thermal head and heat. He noticed the way the corner of the slip had a half circle missing, as if something had hung it once on a nail. He drove that route through spring into summer. Wildflowers rose up along the shoulders in late May and turned the ditches into a painter's patient field. The elk moved less. The wind learned new songs. When he took the ramp to the station again one clear midnight, the big sign said open and his transponder chirped green. He went in anyway. Habit by then. The platform felt the same weight. The same way. The intercom gave a small cough, as if clearing its throat. He waited. The printer was quiet. Lane 2. A different voice said this time. Younger, restless, a bit of humor in it. All good. You're light. Have a good one. No name. No markers. No request that made him feel as if some part of the night could be put into place by small actions. He pulled out with thanks and thought nothing less of it. Stations have people and people change. The road was long and generous and did not ask for more story than a person wanted to give it. But every once in a while, when the amber letters on a sign took their measured time to shift from one thought to another, he would ease off the throttle just a hair and let the delay happen. He would keep an eye on the break in the fence 2 miles ahead where the dirt shows a path that is not a path. He would say, quietly in his head where no radio could hear him, "Copy," and wait for a printer's small song that sometimes came and sometimes didn't. He did not try to prove any of it. He did not try to fix it in place with talk. He matched his speed to the wind, left a little more room on the right, and treated the way stations like small lighthouses in a dry sea, sometimes manned, sometimes not, sometimes talking, sometimes just throwing their light on the water long enough that a person knew where a rock might be. The road liked that kind of respect. It paid it back in ways that looked like luck to anyone who wasn't watching. Story number 5. He took the southern line across the desert because the night there was simple. A straight highway, a dry wind, the smell of creosote that rose and fell like someone breathing. The sky made a low dome and wore a thin veil of cloud that hid nothing. More stars than a person could hold in mind. He liked how the desert told the truth about distance. A radio tower in the dark looked close and turned out to be 20 miles away. A town on the horizon barely made a glow, but it would be there exactly when the map said it would. Signs warned of dust ahead in the practical way they do in that part of the world. Blowing dust next 45 miles. Pull off roadway when possible. Do not stop. In travel lanes. He nodded to the empty cab like someone had spoken directly to him. He had driven through enough brownouts to know how quickly daytime can become a room with the lights off, even at night. The sensation strange and familiar at the same time. He set his speed where he knew he could think. He checked the distance to the next exit and tucked the number away. The smell of the air changed before the road did, as if a field had been plowed somewhere far away. The CB hissed, then went quiet, then hissed again with a small dry crackle that reminded him of combing a sweater on a winter day. Static crept along metal edges. When he set his hand on the gear shift, he felt a tiny bite on his knuckles, a little lick of electricity. On the weather band, a calm voice read out a dust storm warning, with the patience of someone who had said the same paragraph all their life. Visibility may be reduced to near zero. Pull aside, turn off lights, keep foot off brake pedal. The words did not care if a person listened. They were there if anyone needed them. He topped a shallow rise and saw it. The line of night ahead looked like a wall had been drawn across it. No marks on it, no light through it. The faintest gritty glow at its base where highway lights turned the dust into the inside of a brown bottle. He adjusted his seat and set the climate control to recirculate without thinking. He looked for the shape of an exit sign and saw none. A roadside mile marker showed itself in his beams in a way that meant it had not yet surrendered. Then the dust took the road. The feeling when a storm like that arrives can be gentle if a person makes it so. The cab seemed to get smaller and kinder. The world outside was nothing but sound. Sand wrote on metal. The windshield turned into a sheet of noise. He reduced speed to a number that felt stupid in daylight and wise now. The white line to his right became the only place he wanted his eyes. He kept the wheels on that thread of paint. The way you guide your hands along a wall in the dark. He clicked off the radio because the voices kept touching his nerve wrong and unhelpful. He breathed and let the engine do the steady things engines do. He looked for taillights not because he wanted to follow anyone, but because taillights in dust are trouble. Red in the haze draws people like a porch lamp draws moths. He saw no red. He saw nothing except the calm lane line on the right and the occasional reflector that returned his light like a promise. The sign for a rest area, he thought, rose and fell without giving actual words. He passed an emergency pullout with a cable gate chained across it, and the vision struck him oddly, how the chain bowed in the wind like a slender hammock. The AM band crackled once, and a voice arrived as if he had tuned it on purpose. It did not sound like the weather robot. It sounded like a real person reading off a card they had touched 100 times. Commercial traffic in the vicinity of mile 212, mile 213. You have an open maintenance spur on your right, marked by a white tank, the voice said. Gate is open. Turnout can accommodate 2 tractors and trailers. Once inside the spur, put your tractor behind the windbreak. Keep lights off. Do not use headlights to look for the building. Follow the reflectors on the fence. Stay in your vehicles. He tilted his head as if that might help his ear make a decision. The voice had a quiet authority that felt like it knew the road he was on. The words made sense. He had seen maintenance spurs along here, little gravel snakes leading to block buildings the color of dust. He had also never heard them announced on a radio like a neighbor, letting you know the back gate was unlatched. He checked the mile markers the way a person checks their pulse. The last he had seen had been 210. The line of numbers ticked along in his head. Static ticked in the speakers like a blind pulled across a window. The voice continued, steady. If you pass the white tank, do not stop. Continue to mile 215. Do not stop in the lanes. Maintain line of sight distance to the right-hand fog line. It repeated itself as if it knew brains needed that when dust erased the world. Then it went quiet. He decided that yes, he would believe in a white tank and an open gate. The danger of wishing for a thing is one kind of danger. The danger of not daring to wish for it is another. He softened his grip on the wheel. He watched the right-hand shoulder for something too straight to be rock and too smooth to be brush. Minutes stretched differently inside a brownout. He could have sworn he had been driving for half an hour. He had gone a mile and change. He saw the shape of a vertical cylinder step out of the noise. At the last instant, a water tank painted a kind of government white that no weather could fully ruin, a pipe elbow above it, like a bent arm pointing nowhere. The chain across the spur entrance hung loose. He tapped the turn signal even though no one could see it, and eased the rig into the gravel at an angle that felt respectful of physics. The traction changed under his tires to a dry crunch. The wind leaned at him differently. He nosed forward until the fence rose out of the dust at elbow height, a string of wire and posts topped with round glass reflectors with marbles of light in them, old style, the kind road crews used decades back. His low beams hit the posts, and each one returned a small coin of brightness that led away along the fence into the haze. He remembered the voice asking for lights off inside. He clicked his headlamps dead. The cabin went cave dark. His marker lights threw a honey glow on the hood. and made the edges of the mirrors polite and unthreatening. He let his eyes adjust. The fence posts, with their glass buttons, still answered his markers and made a faint dotted path. He followed it at walking pace, careful not to cut the corner, careful not to clip a post. The windbreak appeared as a low wall of stacked concrete barriers, the sort used to guide lanes through construction, interlocked into a short arc that made a pocket of calm. He pulled in behind it and stopped. The sound changed the way sound changes when a person ducks their head under a blanket. He could hear his breath. He could hear the sand on his bumper as individual grains. He set his brake and felt the rig sigh. There was another set of lights faintly behind him now, low and golden, a second truck creeping into the spur. He let his hand hover near the CB mic and did not pick it up. The weather band offered nothing. The AM voice had gone to ground. The cab took on the softness that comes when a night forces a person to keep their world small. He listened to the storm write its code on every surface. Sand can sound like rain when it has a lot to say. It can also sound like whispering when it slides along metal. It drummed his trailer in a pattern too steady to be a person's hand. It found the slots on his step and sang there like a reed instrument. Something light bumped the bumper. A tumbleweed having a bad evening. The idea of knocks from inside the sleeper, something he had experienced in other places, did not come to him. The building he could not see made no noise. The air smelled like dry earth and a little ozone. He turned the fan down until it barely moved and kept the system on recirc. He took a sip of water and tasted dust anyway. Because that's how dust works. He put his phone in airplane mode to keep it from chewing battery, looking for a signal that did not exist. The static on the CB lifted once and dropped, as if something had touched the antenna with a charged hand. The windbreak did its job. The cab felt steady in the gusts that made the trailer flex, like a large animal turning in its sleep. Then, unmistakably, the AM returned, as if someone had put their hand on the right part of an old mixer. Vehicles inside the spur, the voice said. Not excited. Not sleepy. Icons will be faint on your side view. Do not open doors. Maintain radio silence. When the antenna pops 3 times, condition improves. He almost smiled because calling the little static discharges pops was such a human, practical phrase. It made him think of someone in a room with a rotary phone and a coffee can full of pens. He sat with the truck idling low, then shut it off, and listened to the strange, gentle vacuum that follows. When the engine is quiet, a driver can hear the world talk to itself. He could hear his own pulse tick along in his ears. He could hear the sandy rasp of the storm against the barrier, and beyond that, the broader sweep of wind moving across open land, a low glassy roar. The other truck's engine clicked as it cooled. The windbreak made a lip, and the air ran over it like water over a rock, a steady, calming shape. He thought of the night watch at out-of-the-way places, of the way some parts of the road seemed to know when to keep a person still and when to step them forward. He tried not to think of the highway a few hundred yards left, of drivers who had not found a spur and who had trusted red brake lights that should not have been on. He pictured them pulled over safe at a distance that did not invite contact, as the advisory asks. He pictured that because it was the right picture to hold. Time did what it does. He drifted into that thin rest that is not sleep but lets a person's shoulders forget they are tired. He woke, not because of a sound but because of the lack of one. The drumming had softened. The whispering had become sand pawing at sand. The storm had thinned from wall to curtain. He lifted his head and sat up straighter and listened with his whole body. The antenna popped. It was small, a tiny click in his bones. A moment later, it popped again. He held his breath. The third pop arrived like a bead, dropped in a bowl. He exhaled and laughed once, in a way that did not make sound, and turned his markers back on. The fence posts winked away into the gray, and then into something like air. Headlights could come back now. He clicked them on low and let their shallow cones brush the world. The building resolved. A blockhouse with a flat roof, a radio mast beside it with a red light fixed halfway up. The door of the building wore a civil defense sign from another century. The yellow and black triangle faded almost to a ghost. A padlock held the door with a seriousness that suggested no one had been inside in a long time. The white tank stood where it had stood. The chain that had hung loose across the spur when he entered was now pulled up and latched on its hook, but without a lock, as if someone had set it closed as a courtesy. He could not say when that had happened. He rolled forward into the daylight version of the storm and felt it push his trailer like a shoulder instead of a wall. In his mirror, the other truck eased out, a dark block wearing a soft outline. They did not speak on the radio. They did not need to. He pulled to a stop near the spur entrance and waited, and when the other truck reached the gate and paused, he eased out to the main line first and set his blinker like a person stepping into a room should announce himself. The highway lay as if nothing had happened. The dust still lifted in thin veils, but the hard edge of it had gone. Half a mile east, a line of vehicles sat nose to tail on the shoulder, not wrecked, simply paused, their windows a stage of faces. He became aware of how long the world had been small and how quickly it had become generous again. He merged and felt the tires find their voice on the clean part of the lane where other tires had dried it. At the first patrol vehicle, he saw hazards on, hood up, trooper with a vest walking a slow line. He eased into the shoulder and put his window down. The trooper came up, lifted his chin in that way men in hats do to be friendly. "You good?" the trooper asked. Visibility came back quicker than the forecast said. He nodded. "Caught the spur at the white tank," he said. "Wasn't sure it was open. Heard a heads up on AM." Sounded official enough. The trooper's eyes moved past him toward the featureless gray on the far side of the highway where a wash ended in brush and could make all the wind it wanted. "That spur?" he said, as if he was measuring a picture against a memory. "That station's been closed since '09. We used to run it. Had a guy out there nights who kept folks from panicking. Mendoza. Voice like a map. When they pulled the radios out, I guess the wind took up the job." He shrugged in a way that said he was not being poetic. "Good catch on the tank. A lot of people think they should sit right where they are. The line stacked up a while back. No harm done. We got them moved when the gusts dropped." He tapped the side of the truck with a polite knuckle. "Roll safe. Keep it to low beam. Don't stare at the red." People put in their brakes when they're scared. He eased back into traffic. The other truck from the spur slid into the lane behind him and gave a little space. The dust lifted to a thin ribbon above the scrub. The world's edges returned. He felt a fine grit on his teeth and did not mind. He put the AM band on and rolled the knob slowly, listening for the voice that had given him the right words, but all he found were preachers and a sports call-in show and a humming that might have been an empty frequency. He took the next exit and turned into a roadside lot to knock dust out of his air filter and stretch the set out of his legs. A maintenance truck sat under a light with the hood up, and a man in an orange vest bent over the engine and then stood and took a drink of water and waved. "You catch the spur?" he called. "Smart." He walked over and leaned his elbows on the chain link. The white tank stood behind it like a farmhouse you only ever pass and never visit. "I did," he said. "How often does someone sit out here and pull folks in?" The man in the vest laughed without irony. "Nobody sits," he said. "We ain't got the budget to sit. We checker the gates when we can. The wind opens them. The wind closes them. Some nights the old glass reflectors do more than we can. Whole fence lines original. I keep meaning to replace the tops. People like the new plastic. I like the old glass. Shines different." He took another drink and wiped his mouth with the base of his hand. "You hear Mendoza? Old-timers say he loved those storms. Would talk dudes down off the ledge with a weather report and a joke you could tell your grandma." He did not say he had heard a voice like that. He did not need to. He looked at the chain at the spur entrance, how it rested on its hook. No lock. Only gravity and habit keeping it put. He saw the faint scuff of tires like his tracing a line into the yard and back out again, a neat figure 8 of common sense. He nodded once and went back to his rig. On the return trip days later, the wind had nothing to say, and the spur looked like any forgotten yard. The padlock on the blockhouse door sat at an angle that said nobody bothered it. A bird perched on the fence post and used the glass button as a tiny stage. He flicked the knob to AM out of habit and got a ball game that sounded like it was coming from a faraway kitchen. He smiled to himself, because that sound had its own gentleness. He did not keep the story for believing or disbelieving. He kept it for instruction. When the world asks you to make it small, make it small. When a voice appears with a set of good, simple rules, follow them. When the dust lifts, roll on. The desert does not remember kindness any more than it remembers trouble, but people do. He left the spur as he had found it, chain on the hook, glass buttons shining, white tank standing where the sun could find it at every hour, and behind him, the highway stitched itself back to the horizon like nothing had ever come between. Story number 6. He took the northern route because the air up there felt like glass, and the road cut through it in tidy lines. Winter had settled with intention. The sky hung low and pale, like someone had slid a sheet of paper over the stars. Snow fences marched along the fields in measured rows, and the wind combed what they caught into ripples that looked like handwriting. His tires hummed a tone he knew meant the pavement was cold enough to matter, but not yet a sheet. He carried a light load, boxed and strapped, nothing that would leave him heavy on hills, and he liked the way the trailer moved behind him like a thought that agreed. The first flurries came as specks the color of old milk in the beams, and then thickened into a gentle static. The road had been brined earlier. Dark stripes ran like quiet rivers between lanes. An overhead sign threw its orange words into the clean air and let them hang. Plows forming rolling wall. Do not pass. Next 20 miles. He nodded once to nothing in particular. He knew the shape of that procession. Big blades across lanes like a door, heavy trucks pushing Winter back into the ditch. The CB carried the thin, practical chain of plow chatter somewhere ahead. They ran a disciplined talk, not for show, for function. Left wing down, a woman's voice said. Bridge deck, in 3. Watch the crosswind in the notch. A man answered with the tone of someone who had done this his whole life. Copy. Salt heads at half. Center stays clean. He turned his volume down a notch. He preferred to listen without being tempted to join. Their lights appeared as colored ghosts at the vanishing point amber and white, and the steadier red of a tail lamp. The snow made them tall. He'd seen light pillars before. On nights this cold, ice crystals hung in the air and turned every beacon into a vertical column that ran from earth to sky. The plows looked like machines with halos. He eased his speed down until the gap between his nose and their wing felt like respect. They ran 3 across, left, center, right, offset, so their blades overlapped and threw snow into a formation that kept it from falling back. The rightmost rode the shoulder with its wing blade folded out, shaving the drift that Winter had piled into the rumble strip. The center truck was newer, state livery bright, its LED beacons cutting the air clean. The one on the left wore an older paint, dulled by years and salt. Its fenders had a high curve to them, a shape the newer trucks didn't bother with. Its amber strobe spun the old way, a lazy, hypnotic rotate that put a warm circle into the dark, rather than a staccato. The number on its door, under the grime, read 12. He set himself 2 full truck lengths back and let the plows draw the line. Snow drifted in sheets that behaved like water and then like smoke. The center plow's blade curled the white and sent it rolling like a carpet. Snow hissed under the edges the way sand does in wind. Behind that rolling door, the road was simply road. 2 lanes and a shoulder, wet and clean to the pavement. Tame for as long as the crew held it that way. He saw a car ghost up behind him, and then to his left in the mirror, low and eager. The driver thought for a moment about the gap between plows, and then thought better. The CB flared as if picking up that thought and setting it down. Easy, four-wheeler, the woman said in the tone of a teacher who knew the good answer was about to arrive. Sit tight. We'll give lanes back at the county line. The car steadied itself and tucked in behind. The snow, pleased to have more bodies to ride on, wrapped everyone in the same patient noise. He had his high beams off, his dash lights dimmed to a gentle dusk. The moon, a thin coin, threw a halo large enough to look like a room lamp's circle against the clouds. The highway unrolled in glances, mileposts with their heads powdered white, reflectors winking like tiny fish as his beams brushed them, distances announced and then taken. He could hear the plows even from back where he was, heavy engine notes, the shape of the blades against concrete, a faint judder as they hit a joint in the deck and set up a rhythm. The CB popped and carried a different voice, lower, grainy, very local. Bridge ice, it said, that simple. He didn't know if it had come from one of the trucks ahead or from a patrol parked at a median cut. He laid his hands a fraction lighter on the wheel. The winter had a way of dropping a film over bridges that felt like nothing, and then suddenly mattered. He let the line of the plows be the thing he watched. The viaduct came into view as a shifting of texture more than a sight. Guardrails appeared and vanished in the stream of snow. The crosswind in the notch pushed at the trailer with a hand that wasn't cruel, just insistent. The old left-hand plow leaned into it, and the spray from its blade took on a different angle, finer, like flour from a sieve. He watched, and when the trick of the wind tried to make his rig step right, he eased left a shade. The way his body wanted long before his brain. Caught up. He felt the tires sing a note up, and then settle. Ahead, in that lap of the bridge where the wind did its mischief, the old left plow's amber strobe slowed. He thought at first the motor had failed. The light, though, had a rhythm to it that wasn't mechanical. 3 deliberate turns. A pause. 3 again. He didn't know the code. It looked like a habit, or like someone tapping their fingers on a table to see if anyone in the room had the same song in their head. He breathed with it without meaning to. The 3 trucks held their shape. To their right, the snow fence did its art and piled winter into a wave that wanted to leap into the road, and then thought twice. They crossed the span and descended into a shallow valley, where a lonely grove of leafless trees gathered around a house set far back. Porch lights in the distance burned steady yellow under their own halos, and in that cold the light stretched up in pillars all around the townlets, like cathedral columns made of air. It looked like someone had set the whole county in a room with tall lamps and opened the ceiling to the sky. The plows reached a long straight where the wind died down and everything seemed easier. The center driver came on CB. "Rail crossing 2 up. We're good. No train tonight." The right-hand driver answered with humor. He probably aimed at the night to keep it friendly. "Don't jinx it. Last week we got to dance with the empty coal string for an hour." They were talking to each other, and he understood to let the conversation pass like weather. A drift had crept out just there, where the fence had a gap for a farm drive, a curl edgier than the rest. The old left plow took it straight, wing cutting a hard seam and throwing the white back into itself. For a moment he saw the left truck's rear tires disappear into the plume and then reappear, steady, calm. He didn't know why he had been worried. Sometimes the body worries on principle. He loosened his grip again and felt the steering wheel become a wheel and not a handle. The crossing's flashers stood quiet when they reached them, the glass of their lenses heavily frosted like dessert left in the freezer too long. The rails had a whisper under the tires he had always liked, a small change of tone like a simple chord. A single green signal a mile down the track lit the air as if it had been waiting with nothing else to do. A mile later, a car the same one from earlier, or another, it didn't matter, darted out again like a fish that had thought of a different route. The left plow never moved. The center driver spoke in that patient radio voice that made it impossible to misunderstand. "Don't try it," he said. "You'll end up in the wing. You don't want the wing." The car thought better and fell back again. The left plow kept its blade down, and its old beacon turned its circle, steady as a clock. The light above it pillared up to the low clouds and made a mast out of the air. They rolled like that for long enough that time fell into the rhythm of tires and blade and light. He sipped coffee from a wide-mouthed thermos that kept the cup warm against his lip. He turned the fan a notch to keep the windshield a little drier than it wanted to be. He let the miles pass through his hands like rope. The county line sign came out of the snow thinner than usual, but visible. The plows began their slow ballet to give the road back to itself. The right-hand one eased its wing in. The center raised a fraction. The left lifted last, so the lane stayed clean to the shoulder. He felt the sudden generosity of the lane open like a door. They brought their speeds up together, quiet, disciplined. The right-hand driver called a brake. "Next exit has the only coffee for 40. 10 minutes, Mike?" "Sharon?" "10, the woman said. "Need to kick clods out of the fenders. Ice has opinions." The old left plow never spoke but kept its place until the ramp. At the gore, it peeled off into the left turn lane as if it had a plan. He watched it go in the mirror, the old beacon turning slow, the blade scarred but neat, the number 12 dark on the door. It took the loop that would lead it into the state yard. He followed the 2 newer plows down the ramp and into a lot where a C-store threw white light onto tire tracks and diesel pumps made their steady, consoling clatter. He parked a polite distance away and set his brake. He watched the plows roll to a stop by the side of the building where the worker's door was. He climbed down and felt the air bite his teeth. He caught them as they walked to the door, brushes under their arms like two barbers, about to give the night a trim. He lifted his chin in the hello that fits winter. "Thanks for the wall," he said. That notch was lively. The woman grinned in a way that warmed the area immediately around them. "She likes to shove," she said. "Best to lean back." The man, taller, knocked his boot heel against the curb and then smiled because that made a sensible sound. "Appreciate you not trying to thread the needle," he added. "Some folks want to see what the ditch tastes like." He looked past them toward the yard down the frontage road, a dark rectangle with a chain-link fence and a row of trucks under lights that made everything look flatter than it was. "3 makes it easy," he said. "That left hand was working." "Left?" the woman asked. She checked her memory with her eyes. "We've only got 2 on this run tonight." "Old one," he said, searching for detail that didn't sound like a story. "High fenders, slow beacon, number 12 on the door. Sounded like you were talking to it." The 2 plow drivers traded a careful glance. One of those quick, not chilly looks people make when the room's temperature changes by a degree and they felt it. The man scratched the brim of his cap and chose an angle. 12 sat in the pole barn by the salt dome till summer, he said. They rolled her out and put her on blocks by the sign, kind of a lawn ornament. "She earned it. We run new ones now." The old gasser didn't have the lungs for the long grade. He wasn't arguing. He was placing facts. The woman's smile slipped into something a little more like respect. "You might be talking about old 12, she said, using an old-fashioned piece of grammar to separate it from its numbers. "They kept the number. We don't say it on the radio." She tugged a glove tight. "Crew tells stories about her pulling folks through the 88 whiteout when the road vanished, old blade with a patched wing. She's the reason we say dead slow across the viaduct, even if you think you can do better." She lifted a shoulder as if to shrug, but let the move stall halfway. "You want coffee? It'll taste like hot plastic and do its job." He wanted to ask whether anyone had ever thought they saw 3 where there were 2, whether the old slow beacon had ever left a circle of gold in someone's mirror when it should not have. He wanted to ask if anyone listened for a 3rd engine and found one. Instead, he said, "I'll grab a cup." "Thanks." He meant more than coffee. Inside, the store had the brightness of a small-town hospital corridor and the smell of damp mittens. A bulletin board by the door held a flyer for ice fishing tournaments and a hand-lettered sign offering sandbags come spring. Behind the counter stood a photograph in a frame, an old print gone slightly green in places. A plow in weather so thick the world had edges only if the plow gave them. The number on the door read 12. Someone had used a label maker to put a name on the bottom of the frame. "In appreciation. Years of service, District Yard." There was also a date from a winter older than his license and newer than the truck he had learned to drive on. He didn't read it to the end. He didn't need to. Coffee was what coffee is in the middle of the night, good if you are kind to it. He carried it back out and breathed steam and looked toward the yard. Under a spotlight, on a pad of frozen gravel, sat a plow with high fenders and an old-fashioned beacon on top that did not turn because it did not have to. Frost laid white along the stripe where the livery used to be bright. The number on the door had been repainted fresh for the display so the shape would read in photographs. 12. The wind had put a little drift up against the front tire. The way wind puts a hand on something it likes. He toggled his markers without meaning to, a small kindness he gave the night sometimes. The spotlight hit some ice in his grill and threw 2 soft pillars up into the sky beside him. He imagined for a second that he saw the old amber beacon on the display twist a quarter turn once, then thought better of believing it. The world didn't have to do tricks to earn attention. He ran the next stretch with lanes wide open and the road agreeing. The light snow kept at it like a good scribe. Far ahead, the plows returned to their work, clean blades sending white into the air like a promise. He kept his distance and let the old feeling of moving with others hold him. On his return 2 days later, the sky had cleared, and cold had set into everything like a habit. The DOT yard in daylight looked like any yard decently kept by people who take pride in their tools. The plow on the pad stood like a monument without asking for that job. As he eased by, he saw a laminated sign on the fence. "Please do not climb on equipment. Thank you." He smiled and obeyed a rule he was happy to have. Weeks down the line, in another state where the land bumped a bit and winter had begun to loosen its grip, he caught a plow train at night again. 2 across. They ran their wall through a small town where porch lights lit and turned everything familiar. Above them, The beacons cast pillars. A third light, older, slow, seemed to slide along the far edge of his vision. Not where a truck could be, but where a thought could. He kept it there, unchased. Roads were full of noises that had no shape until a person insisted, and he had decided not to insist. He did not fold the experience into belief or disbelief. He put it beside the other things the night had shown him. The way ice fog makes halos on a lone street lamp. The way an empty track sings under tires. The way a county road crew's calm voices can keep a piece of land passable for people who have promises to keep. When a sign said stay behind the wall, he stayed. When the wind pushed left over the bridge, he leaned right. When old light turned slow in a world of fast beacons, he matched his breathing to it and let his hands stay light on the wheel. Story number 7. He ran the prairie at an hour when the wind farms wore their red lights like quiet eyes. The highway was a straight pin. The land around it kept its breath. Out there, the night didn't feel empty. It felt organized. The turbines lined the ridges in measured rows, each tower the height of a modest skyscraper, each nacelle blinking a patient red, on and off, in a rhythm that made the horizon look like a heartbeat stretched wide. The air was so dry he could hear his tires talk to the pavement in a low, steady note. The tanker behind him rode smooth, baffled right, weight centered, the line easy in his hands. The temperature fell 2 degrees in 10 miles. Frost rimed the grasses, where the ditch held a whisper of moisture. The LED trees on his dash wore their dim nighttime faces. A highway sign rose out of the dark in that careful, reflective way. Caution icing possible on roadway and structures. He let the words land, and then kept doing what he was doing, steady speed, light touch, watch the right-hand line like it was telling the only truth there was to tell. He had a name for this stretch in his head, though he never said it out loud. The metronome. The synchronized beacons would drift in and out of agreement over miles, whole fields of lights finding each other, then losing each other, as if the land inhaled and exhaled on a slow count. He would sometimes click his marker lights in time with them, a private joke that made the night feel like it was listening. A colder breath slid under his door and made his ankles aware of themselves. The road surface took on that fine, glassy sheen in patches. A suggestion, not a threat, the way a lake might show itself through thin ice. His wipers did a lazy sweep to push off a film that hadn't quite found courage to be a film. He turned the defroster up 2 clicks and kept the glass clear. On the AM band, between a preacher and a farm report, a voice came in clean as if it had been waiting for him. It sounded like a person used to radios. Level, friendly, a tiny bit clipped to save words. Northbound traffic approaching Ridge 2. Wind facility advisory, the voice said. Icing event in progress. Do not stop beneath towers. Reduce speed to 4 to 3. Low beams only. Keep to right lane. Do not look directly at blade shadows. Keep eyes on the fog line. Small ice will strike your vehicle, this is normal. Maintain course. He checked the dial without touching it. He hadn't tuned to any kind of highway advisory. The voice offered a detail that mattered. Sector names. Ridge 1 clear. Ridge 2 shedding. Ridge 3 unknown. Maintenance escort is on the frontage. If you see an amber bar ahead, keep 300 feet. We'll pace you to clear air. He considered the possibility that it was a recording, some local service broadcast, one of those low-power signals that make small places feel taken care of. He considered the other possibility that the night had decided to give him a voice that knew things. He adjusted his speed to 43, because the number had the feel of practice built into it. Too slow made a driver twitch. Too fast made a small thing into a large thing. 4-3 could be held without thinking. That was a kindness. The first towers came close to the road, their bases set back just far enough to be polite. In daylight, they looked like stern birds. In the night, with the moon behind thin cloud, they were graceful bones. The blades turned slow, an enormous hand waving once every few seconds. The red beacons blinked in near unison along the ridge, and for a moment the lights arranged themselves so that the road felt like a corridor. He let that thought pass. A truck had no business being in a corridor. A truck belonged on a line. The ghost of a flicker passed over the cab. It wasn't light. It was absence of light. The blade taking a bite out of moon and giving it back. The flicker can pull the eye the way a trout takes a fly. He let it happen in the corner of his sight, and kept his gaze where the voice had put it, the white paint on the right. The little cat's eyes embedded every few car lengths, returning his low beams in eager, tidy coins. Then the sound began, a new small music. Faint, crisp taps on the roof, like someone tossing grains of rice to bless a couple at a wedding. He knew this story from a safety memo. When the blades pick up ice in the right conditions and then throw it as they pass through air that wants to let go, you get sprinkle, ping, soft rattle, and sometimes the thunk of something bigger. It wasn't a storm from the sky. It was local weather, made by machines. The taps multiplied, a polite, persistent patter. He relaxed his shoulders exactly because the body wanted not to. Up ahead, low and to the right, an amber bar appeared, one of those old-school roof lights that rotate instead of strobe. It was on a white pickup with a state seal half faded on the door and a number on the tailgate that looked like the last two digits of a phone extension, 07. The truck ran the frontage at a matching speed, then eased onto the on-ramp and found the right lane with the certainty of a hand finding its pocket. Its rear window wore a slice of frost like lace. It held 300 feet in front of him without letting the gap play. The CB gave a soft cough and carried the same voice he'd heard on the AM. Northbound tanker, you're good where you are. Keep it between the fog line and the seam. We won't stop. If the red goes out on a tower, ignore it. That's R3 reset cycling. He resisted the instinct to key up. The person was doing a job that wasn't a conversation. The flicker grew more pronounced through here. The moon, behind the cloud, threw just enough light that when the blade passed between it and the road, the world stuttered a little. Shadows from towers stitched themselves across asphalt and the ditch and his hood, all at the same slow speed, then went away. The effect could make a person clench their jaw without knowing. He unclenched his. He added half a pound of pressure back into the wheel, enough to feel the line. The amber pickup's brake lights blinked 3 short pulses at odd intervals. Not braking exactly, more code. He realized a beat late that the pulses were happening just before the densest parts of the flicker. It was as if someone ahead was saying, "Here comes the worst of it. Don't let your animal brain take the wheel." He matched his breathing to the count. Lights blink 1, 2, 3. Then he exhaled. A pelting of beads hit the truck's right side like a bucket of dry lentils. The noise startled, but did not unsettle. He could imagine them 1,000 tiny cylinders of brittle ice spun from the blade tips, racing sideways under the wind, choosing their own angles. He imagined them because it made it less likely he'd add a story the night didn't want to tell. One tower's red beacon winked out, and then, after a pause long enough to be noticeable, came back. Another far down the line did the same, as if the ridge had devised a wave. The amber ahead eased left a foot. He held to his lane. The voice returned, not to instruct but to narrate. Ridge 2 is cycling. Ice load on blade roots. Everyone keep to pattern. The pickup's antenna had a tiny tuft of frost on it that looked like a feather he couldn't forget. He passed a sign on the right with a phone number and a polite message, the kind that appear where private property meets public road. Wind Facility Field Office. For emergency assistance call. He read the digits without deciding to memorize them. His phone buzzed once in the dash cubby and lit briefly with those same numbers on the screen. It did not ring. The notification cleared itself like a thought that had interrupted, and then apologized. He found that he was not surprised, and found a small space in himself to set that unsurprise aside for later. The pickup's amber glowed like a portable beacon in a sea of fixed ones. He could see, through its back glass, the outline of a hard hat on a passenger seat. The bar turned a steady, dignified pace. The truck neither hurried nor lagged. The driver never turned their head. They were completely, unshowily there. Wind moved differently here. You could feel where the blade throw added its opinion to the breeze, small gusts like a flock changing angle. The sound, against the truck, changed in patches, tap, 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 the sugar sand noise of tiny ice, then quiet, then another burst. One piece larger than the rest rattled on his step and skittered off. He resisted the itch to flick the high beams or reach for the horn. He stayed with what he knew. 40, 3, low beams, keep to line. A county road crossed under the highway and scissored away toward a farmhouse lit with 2 warm squares of window. The turbines went taller there in perspective. their red eyes not blinking but opening and closing, as if they were living things. He felt a light lift in his chest, the kind that comes when you realize you are in a place that remembers itself even when you don't. The amber pickup tapped its brakes twice and the CB voice said, "Crosswind from left in 200. Count it through." The moment arrived with a soft push. Not much. Just enough to press the trailer half an inch right. He slid in the left rear tire's track he had been keeping and let the push spend itself. The push did exactly what the voice said it would do, and then quit. At the far end of Ridge 2, the towers fell back from the road, and the red lights stepped down into one field, and then another like lines of people sitting after a standing ovation. The taps on the roof stopped. The flicker softened until it was only the thought of a flicker. The amber pickup's tailgate shone with that overpainted number, 07. He lifted one hand an inch off the wheel and set it back down, an acknowledgement with no audience. The pickup signaled right, and took an exit into a driveway signed Operations in small letters. The gate across the drive was closed by a chain hung through itself with no lock. The pickup turned as if it had a key anyway, and slid beyond the fence. When the fence bars passed between the amber bar and the highway, the light stuttered in sections and then was gone. He rolled on. The AM voice, as if it had been recording at the same time as living, said, "Traffic clear of Ridge 2. Ridge 3 status. Lights out for courtesy. Flicker minimal. Thank you for staying in pattern." It went quiet, as if a hand had lifted from a microphone and set it down with care on a desk that had a ring from an old coffee cup cut into the wood. He didn't seek a second voice. He didn't scan the band for confirmation. He let the night go back to its wide shape. The turbines on the next ridge were dark to the road. Their beacons either turned away or shut down to keep the sky calmer for someone else. The moon, half-coated in haze, put a white milk on the land. He breathed in and out, and felt his hands settle into their home positions without asking. At the travel plaza 20 miles on, the kind that kept 3 diesel islands lit like stages, he went in for coffee and a sense of being in a room that had walls. The cashier wore a fleece with the facility logo and poured coffee with the attention of a person who had learned how not to spill. On a corkboard by the lottery machine, a laminated sheet announced Winter Operations Wind Corridor Courtesy. It was a simple list. Do not stop under towers. Do not use high beams in icing. Maintain steady speed. The bottom had a small note. If you saw a maintenance escort, please do not attempt to flag them. They will not stop. He tapped the corner of the sheet with one finger lightly, a habit he had, a way of making a mental note stick. The cashier saw the motion and smiled. "You hit it while they were shedding?" she asked. "People get spooked. We had a guy come in once, coat full of little ice tubes like he'd rolled in a cooler." She shook her head as if amused at the idea that weather could be so well behaved. It came in a tidy shape. "Had a guide," he said, not like he wanted to convince her, just to put a dot on the line. She laughed softly. "I doubt it," she said. "They don't run nights. Turn the whole farm dark sometimes, so the sky looks better for the observatory. Folks in the valley like their stars. You probably tucked behind a county truck. Those fellas never sleep." She handed him change for a 20, even though he'd used a card. That little mistake people make at 3 in the morning. Then she blinked, recalculated, and slid the bill back like she was resetting her own lights. "Sorry. Long shift." He didn't correct her about the maintenance escort. He didn't say anything about the gate with the chain hung through itself, about the number on the tailgate, about the voice that had put a calm in his chest he could still feel. He paid and kept the receipt. In the corner by the door, a rack held tourist brochures about the wind farm's open house in summer, the day kids could get balloon hats and sit in a parked bucket truck and learn how electricity goes where it goes. He liked thinking about cars lined up along the frontage in daylight, and the same amber bar signaling a different pattern. Fun, not weather. On his return run at noon the next day, the wind farm looked like a sculpture. The blades barely turned. The beacons were still. The operations gate stood in sunlight with a tidy sign that asked deliveries to check in. He slowed just enough to read the contact number and saw the same digits he had read by reflectivity at night. He could imagine calling and telling someone that their radio voice had been a kindness, that the amber bar had held the exact right space ahead. He didn't call. He kept rolling and let the day eat the rest of the miles. Weeks later, with spring thinking about arriving, he hit the same stretch under a sky so clear it felt like it couldn't hold birds. The turbines turned lazily. The red beacons had no reason to speak. A minivan sat on the shoulder with a family taking pictures, the blades framing their smiles like a trick at a carnival. He passed at a respectful distance and watched the kids wave at their own camera. On another night in another state, farther north and away from that particular metronome, he dialed past the static and found a voice much like the one he'd heard that winter. It spoke to someone else, near a different ridge, about small rules that felt like larger mercy. "Keep it to 4 to 3, it said. "Low beams only. Eyes on the line. That's you through." He turned the volume down and let it be what it was, a way for people to keep one another moving without making a big shape in the air around it. Sometimes, miles after, he would think of the amber pickup and the way it stepped off at the gate, like a person going into a room everyone else knew not to enter. He would think of the sign by the fence and the chain with no lock, and the old rotating beacon turning a slow, humane circle in a world that liked to strobe. He would match his marker lights twice to a field of quiet red far away and feel, for 3 blinks, a sense of being in step with something larger than a road and smaller than a miracle. Story number 8. He chose the coastal bypass because the city would be sleeping, and the long causeway would be empty enough to feel like a promise. Out there, the road floated above marsh and open water, low and level, rising now and then into a high, clean arc for boat traffic, and then settling again. Salt lived in the air even at night. The breeze had a taste to it. On clear evenings, the moon laid a silver road along the bay, but not tonight. Low fog hovered at knee height, the kind that thickened in hollows and thinned on the spans, a breath that kept changing its mind. The first miles were simple. Expansion joints ticked under the steers with a comforting thump-chuff, the rhythm of an old friend. The barrier walls were modest, just enough to keep headlights honest. Past the rail, the black water waited and moved. Shorebirds kept their own schedule. The occasional heron, a pale suggestion at the edge of his beams. A shape that knew the night better than he did. Navigation lights far out in the channel did their patient red-green conversation, and at a distance 2 white range lights lined up into a single star. Mariners used those to keep straight. He liked knowing that. He liked the thought that the road and the water shared a vocabulary of lights, lanes for different kinds of travel. Signs posted ahead of the spans were practical. No stopping on bridge. Tune radio. To 1630 AM. For bridge information. Drawbridge ahead. Use caution. He smiled at the last out of habit. The draw had been replaced by a high fixed span before he'd earned his first CDL. The old tender's shack, where it used to be, had been hauled away. What remained were the paired machinery houses now used for cameras and weather stations, and the bright yellow ladders that dropped into the dark. The bell that used to sound when the deck lifted had been put in a museum up the road. He'd been told by a clerk who liked to talk. He tuned the AM band anyway. A recorded voice laid out the basics fog advisory for Bayside, marine hazard light in service, no closures planned. It had that even pace advisories have. Words turned into good neighbors. He turned the volume down until it was only a thread, and let it be a part of the cab's weather. Traffic thinned to nothing. The fog made the far end of every span a secret until he arrived at it. He kept his speed where the night felt listened to. The cab was a small country of light. Buttons dimmed to their warmest setting, the defroster set just high enough to sweep the glass of any chill that wanted to settle. He cracked the settled of Laster de Narting, window an inch, and let the brackish smell in. It made the road feel like it belonged to the outside again. He reached the first of the high arcs and felt the world open. The low fog fell away and revealed the bay, a sheet of soft, dark, broken by the pricks of channel markers, a few moored boats turning slowly on their lines, a tiny working light from somebody's skiff. A horn far out answered a foghorn closer in. The low bellow carried through his bones. He eased over the crown and down again. The grade as shallow as a thought, hands light on the wheel. Back on the low sections, the fog gathered again, thicker now, like a scarf around the bridge's neck. His headlights made a shallow tunnel. Reflective tabs along the barrier offered their small, steady encouragement. The right side line played the part of a friend you trust when you don't have your own eyes. He set the cruise aside and let his foot do the work. He passed the empty pull-off at midspan with its sign, "Emergency stop only." A yellow gate arm stood there, lowered most of the way, a padlock keeping it from a full fall. Then the AM voice he had nearly forgotten about turned live. The difference was small but clear, like the difference between a picture and a window. Northbound tractor approaching mile 12, maintain speed, low beams only, it said. Stop bar ahead for draw operations. Expect bell. He lifted his foot automatically before he realized what he'd done. There wasn't a draw. The steel and gears had been lifted away a decade ago. The stop bar it mentioned, thick white paint across the deck, had long since been ground down and overlain with newer asphalt. He had crossed this road on days bright as coins and never seen anything that would ask him to stop. He looked for the word test or drill on a sign and found only fog and his own light. The bell began. It wasn't a siren, and it wasn't a tone from a modern signal. It was a mechanical clang, the kind that rings because a hammer hits a shell, bright and insistent without being loud. It carried differently in the fog, as if the air were a hallway. He felt the hair on his arms lift, not because of fear, because an old piece of machinery had spoken a language the night knew. The red lights above the machinery house on the right began to flash in tandem, not a strobe, a steadier pulse, as if someone had found the switch that was wired when the bridge was new. Stop bar, the voice on 1630 said, mild but with a precision that didn't invite edits. Hold until horn ceases. Do not creep. Do not turn wheels. He braked with the care he used for coffee set on the dash. The expansion joints offered their last thump and paused under him. He let the truck settle. He searched for the ghost of paint across the deck and found, after a second, maybe an inch or two where the asphalt wore thin and a faint lighter line hid there, a different texture. He stopped with his bumper at that line because it felt like the right geometry, not because he understood why. In the mirror, diffuse and small, another pair of headlights eased down out of the fog. He hit the CB, low power. Hold at the lights, he said after keying up and listening for any chatter that would make him a nuisance. Bells ringing. The driver behind replied with a quick, "Copy. I see what you see." No need to say more. The bell kept its even work, a metronome in metal. He turned the radio up one notch. The AM voice, as if reading from a card that had been used often and not lately, said, "Vessels northbound. Draw opening. Hold all lanes." He blinked and kept his eyes on the right line because it gave him something that did not change. The bridge did not rise. No leaf split. No rail let go. But beneath the deck something did move, as if the bay itself remembered a cue. A smell came first, not unpleasant, just a whiff of fuel and tide that felt closer than it had a moment ago. A low, steady vibration washed through the structure up into his hands, the kind of tremor you feel in your ribs when a big engine turns somewhere you cannot see it. He leaned forward over the wheel without meaning to, like a person trying to catch a line in an old song. He could not see the vessel. Fog wants to make the world about sound and touch, but a shape hinted below a bulk darker than the water, moving under where the old draw would have made space. The range lights far out, those two whites that make one when a ship is aligned with the channel, slid apart and then together again, the smallest misalignments visible at a distance, as if someone were adjusting the world with a gentle hand. He watched that. He watched the water around the piers take on a tightening that looked like thought. The bell stopped. A horn down on the water answered with a low, satisfied note. The red on the machinery house gave 3 slow flashes and then went dark, leaving only the changing fog to catch his low beams. The AM voice softened. "All lanes clear," it said. "Resume with caution. Keep to right lane. Do not accelerate past 45 until off the span." He didn't think to argue. He eased back onto the throttle, the way a person slips into a conversation. He rolled at 45. The truck behind followed. Beyond the rails, in the white lateral murk, something large moved left to right without showing itself, the way clouds complicate a moon. He kept the line. His hands felt steadier than they had a moment before, not because anything had changed in him, because the road had returned to being a road. At the end of the section, the fog loosened. The higher part of the next span stood ahead with its arch, a clean black against a grayer sky. The night had many small accommodations. It did not owe him an explanation. He followed the arcs over and down until the bayside towers appeared, the toll plaza like a sugar cube city lit in white. He slid into a lane with no other cars, eased to the reader, and felt his transponder chirp. The gate rose. He crept through and rolled to a stop at the glass booth, because the sign asked him to take a paper receipt for commercial records. He put the window down halfway, and the toll collector leaned out into the edge of the fog with a practiced smile that had real kindness in it. "Night for it," she said. She wore fingerless gloves. A tiny heater in the booth clicked and hummed. "Fog plays games," he said, and took the paper. He liked the way toll receipts felt thin, thermal, words that faded if you left them in the Sunday. The timestamp read 112. Under the amount and the lane number, a small line of text, probably for internal use, populated, "Draw open." He looked at it, because habits sometimes catch things. He looked at the collector with the receipt between fingers that were suddenly more awake. "You still log that?" he asked lightly, like someone asking why a menu had a dish no one ordered anymore. "I thought the draw was retired." She tipped her head in a way that meant she wasn't laughing at him. She was thinking. "We don't," she said. "Not that I've seen. That's a legacy field." She looked at his slip when he offered it, eyes narrowing just enough to show interest. "Huh. That prints sometimes when the weather station goes from still to not still quick. Old software. We get the bell and fog on the radio, I mean. For mariners. Folks don't hear it up here unless it's quiet." She slid the paper back. "I'll make a note for maintenance. Drive safe, driver." He pocketed the receipt and rolled into the city, where fog had turned into a low hush around streetlights and palm shadows made soft shapes on concrete. He did his delivery at a market that smelled like cilantro and cold air, and clipped signatures and kept voices low because it was night. He slept in the lot behind the building with a guard who had a fold-up chair and a kind nod. In the morning, sunlight flattened the road and erased the tricks the fog had played. He took the bypass again on purpose to look for the stop bar. Day showed him more than he expected. Faint grooves across the deck where rails had once met steel, concrete patched with asphalt in a rectangular idea that could have been a memory of a leaf. A rectangle of different colored concrete near the rail, exactly where a tender's house might have stood. A cluster of cameras on a pole that peered down like new birds taking over an old tree. No bell. No red lamp. The machinery house's window, shuttered. The sign still asked him to tune to 1630 for information, and he did. The message was the usual fog, caution, no closures planned. He stopped at the little bait and tackle store at the far end of the causeway because he wanted coffee and a story, and the place looked like it kept both. The floor had sand at the threshold where people had carried beach on their shoes and never apologized. On the wall, next to a map with pinholes in it from 50 years of fingers, hung a black and white photograph in a frame too nice for the rest of the room. The picture showed the old draw open, a dark square where the deck should have been, a tug below pushing a barge, a cluster of cars backed up at the stop bar, their headlights pointed like prayers across the gap. A man in a cap leaned from a shack window, hand on a rope. A brass bell hung on a bracket near him, frozen mid-swing. The caption read, "Tender A. Delgado, Seasons on the Night Watch." The date was from a decade when paint had different names. The woman behind the counter poured coffee into a foam cup and followed his eyes. "My granddad's cousin," she said. He loved that job, knew every boat by its engine sound. Said fog was his favorite because everyone had to listen when they couldn't see. She pushed a jar of sugar packets forward with her knuckles. "You run it last night?" "Thick, wasn't it?" "It was," he said. He didn't tell her the software had printed a note about a draw open, or that he'd heard a bell, and a voice that felt like a person who'd rung a bell all their life. He stirred sugar into coffee and let the steam cloud his face for a second. "You still get the bell on the radio in fog?" "Sometimes," she said. "They put the sound on the harbor frequency for the little boats. People don't trust their eyes near the bridge. They know where to be when the tone comes on, invisible lines." She smiled at the idea. It's polite to say excuse me when you move through another person's house, even if that house is water. He nodded and kept his receipt, and drove back inland when his clock said it was time. He told no one who needed proof. It would have made no difference. Nights are full of small courtesies that don't need to sign their name. Weeks later, with a different load and the moon a little fuller, he caught the causeway again at that same hour when most of the city had gone quiet. He tuned the AM out of habit and heard the recorded voice about weather and lights. No bell, no red, no live tone. Fog lay thinner, more interested in the marsh than the road. He passed the place where the old stop bar had been, and felt nothing but the thump of an honest joint under his steer tire. A skiff's running light slid under the span he'd just left like a thought under a door. Months after, weather turned thick as milk again. He eased into the fog and felt the world shrink politely. The bell rang twice, as if testing itself, and then stopped, like a throat cleared. The AM hissed, took a breath, and a voice everyone said, "Hold at the bar." He did, because the line was there in his head whether or not the paint was on the deck. A horn below answered. The range lights lined, and something heavy moved through politely. He went when the red made its quiet secret sign, and thought about a man in a cap leaning from a window that wasn't there anymore, ringing a bell that had found a new way to live. By then, it had become a quiet agreement between him and that stretch of bridge. He gave it time when it asked, and took time when it offered. He didn't decide whether the old draw was done talking. He didn't need to. The causeway was built to keep people moving across something large and shifting. When it needed him to hold still for a moment so that someone else could pass through, he did. The sound of the bell fit into the thump-chuff of the joints, and the horn out on the water, and the sigh of the wind along the barrier. The night stitched its own lanes, and he kept his to the right one, and traffic of all kinds found its way around him. Everyone arrived. Story number 9. He reached the mountain pass at an hour when the sky had set aside stars for a pale, unlit blue. Snow had come and gone days earlier, and left the shoulders rimed, and the rock faces dark with wet. The highway lifted, then tunneled through the ridge in 2 parallel bores, the kind built in a different era tile walls in glossy white, old sodium vapor fixtures tucked into shallow arches, a gentle curve inside that made distance hard to guess. Signs upstream warned with quiet certainty. Center bore closed for maintenance. Use north bore. Tune 1710 AM for tunnel operations. He had run this line 100 times, and most nights the traffic blazed through the newer middle bore with LEDs bright as day and fans that whispered instead of sang. Tonight, amber arrows nudged every vehicle left, and then left again. The road markings sent him toward the older twin, the north bore, a mouth in the hillside trimmed with stone and a brass plaque blackened by time. The transponder on his windshield blinked green. He tuned the AM band. The voice arrived without introduction, the kind that sounds practiced without sounding bored. It was a human voice in the tone of a person who works midnights and has learned how to translate nerves into instruction. Northbound tractor entering the north bore, reduced to 3 to 8, it said. Low beams only, do not use engine brake. Keep your steer tire on the dashed center seam. Maintain lane. Do not stop in the bore. If you hear the emergency phone ring, do not answer. He was not surprised to be told not to stop. He was slightly surprised at the number 38, not 40. Specific numbers come from experience. He set his foot for the exact pace, turned the headlights down, nudged the truck into the line the way a person faces a crowded doorway and decides not to tense. The tunnel mouth took the world down into a tube of light and sound. Inside, the road ran narrow under tile that had seen 1,000 winters. The bulbs cast their sodium color honey on concrete, a light that made everything seem older. Every 100 feet, a recess in the wall held a red door marked cross passage in block letters and a green sign with a running figure pointing left. The ventilation fans hummed overhead. A bass note felt more than heard, a presence that filled the tunnel like weather. The steering needed less correction than he expected. The center seam made a tiny, repeating sound as the tires passed over each paint ridge. A private metronome under the noise. The radio breathed again. 2. Way traffic remains separated. You'll be alone northbound for 3 minutes. Maintain 3 to 8. Mirrors will show following vehicles. They are not in your lane. It said the last without drama, without hinting at story. The voice tended the moment like a person tends a flame. He resisted the habit of scanning his mirrors more than the road requested. Even so, a suggestion of light did appear in the left glass, the soft sway of something that matched his speed. It looked exactly like a set of headlights nested in his wake, except the separation line between bores was a concrete wall with tile on both sides, and no place for anyone to ride his bumper. He let the image stay in the periphery. He had learned the way tunnels played with reflection. Light bouncing off tiles, chasing itself along curves. The body could be fooled. The wheels could not. The first emergency phone box rose up on his right, a red rectangle with a metal handset inside and a small speaker above it. As his truck drew even, the phone rang. Not a modern chirp. A real bell, bright and old. A tone made by metal hitting metal. The air in the cab tightened on reflex. He stayed off the brake, kept the wheel true, held 3 to 8. The ring followed him for a second, and then fell behind, into the tunnel's long echo. He chose to put his attention into the tile. The long arcs of grout, the way the light made a repeating oval pattern that broke and reformed with every fixture, the gray smear where years of air had laid their hand. The tunnel curved a careful right, then steadied. Far ahead, the light at the exit was any distance it wanted to be. On the radio, the voice spoke about air. Below threshold, ventilation cycling in 2. When the fans step down, you will hear your engine more clearly. Do not accelerate. He did hear the shape of the air change. The hum overhead softened, the bass went thin. In the small quiet that followed, new sounds came forward. The little zipper of the tires on painted lane dashes, the faint rattle of a loose lock on a cross-passage door, the drip that never left. Somewhere far down the wall, a boot scuffed concrete. It was ordinary if you lived and worked in a tunnel. He made it ordinary by deciding that it was. The radio again, almost friendly now. Northbound, you have a maintenance cart in the south bore shadow. You'll see its light as your own. Keep to seam. He saw it then as his eyes allowed on his left. Across a world he could not cross, a wobbling, warm, small light bobbed at the pace of someone pushing a cart. It slid along the wall in counterpoint to his truck and disappeared around the curve. He kept his hands where they belonged and let it be a companion he didn't need to acknowledge. The tunnel widened a fraction where an alcove had been cut years ago. The door there had a different paint, newer, and a sign with a date from a decade he remembered for different reasons. Behind its small vision window, he thought he saw movement, and then he told himself it was the camera that surveyed the bore and not a person watching from behind glass. If there had been a person there, they had a room the size of a closet with a chair and a radio and a desk with initials carved into it from people who had cared about the place enough to take a pocket knife to its surfaces. He passed another emergency phone. It did not ring. The fans came back up in a step, not all at once the tone of one motor rising, then another, until the air had the shape it had before. His own engine fell back under the blanket of theirs. He could taste damp concrete and faint oil, and somewhere lower than that, the mineral cold of the mountain itself. Ahead, the light at the end found a scale that felt right. He could see the square of pale growing, not fast, not slow. Overhead, a series of signs lit, and went out in that odd way some tunnels have a running line of arrows and X's to manage lanes when they run work through the night. All of them showed green arrows over his path. One sign flickered a word for an instant. Stop, but the AM voice interrupted his impulse to react. Disregard overhead stop. Panel is on test. Maintain 3 to 8. The overhead sign corrected itself with a visible flicker, as if embarrassed. Lights have their own sense of pride. He smiled without meaning to, and let the small humor occupy his breath. Then the radio departed from the ordinary. Northbound, you will hear a name, the voice said. Do not answer to your own name. Keep lane. 3. 8. He had not told the radio anything. The voice had not asked. He said nothing. A moment later, from the ceiling somewhere, not the speaker, not the phone, a whisper of sound came. Not quite a voice, more like a recorded echo, turned down to suggest itself. His name, spoken in the kind of way people use when they step into a shop and try to decide if they recognize the person behind the counter. He let it pass through him like the thump of an expansion joint. Sound does not have hands. It cannot take the wheel. He kept his left palm open on the rim, his right hand low and light. The fans shifted again, and the air tasted cleaner, as if the mountain had been aired out. He passed a painted line on the tunnel wall, a stripe with numbers that likely belonged to maintenance elevation, station count, things that mattered when men and women came in here to touch the machinery with wrenches. The curve straightened. The exit expanded into a promise rather than a theory. On the radio, the voice resumed its ordinary calm. North portal half mile. Maintain 3 to 8 through the light. Do not accelerate under Sunday northbound ramp has frost. Guardrail repair on the right. He did exactly as told. He let the exit grow without asking it to hurry. The toll of the tile became brighter. The air lost its hum. He kept his speed under the sun that was not quite sun, the high lamps over the portal making artificial day. He watched the seam. He felt the truck stretch and want to go, and did not offer it more than a long, patient breath. The tunnel let him go with the smallest bump where concrete met outside asphalt, the way a threshold lifts a foot an inch and says, "Mind the step." Outside, the world was crisp and a little bluer than he had last left it. The shoulder wore a lace of frost. The guardrail on the right had new bolts where it had kissed a car weeks back. He eased onto the ramp that climbed gently. He kept 38 to the end of the ramp, and then allowed 45 to come back as if invited. A trooper sat under the bridge, white stripe bright on the door, and the trooper's face turned toward him in a quick check a person pays a person. A quarter mile up, the tunnel operations yard rested behind chain link, lit by the kind of lights that make every color a version of gray. A cinder block office held a lobby the size of a motel room with a counter, a bulletin board, and a coffee maker doing its eternal duty. He pulled into the truck lot because he liked to put shape to disquiet. He set his brake, heard the rig settle, and went in. The room held the smell of paper and cold air coming in unreliably from the door. On the wall were pictures of the tunnel's construction men in hard hats without ear protection standing where he had just been, tile clean as teeth, a ribbon cutting with a governor in a hat that wore a feather like a joke. A framed certificate thanked someone for responding to a ventilation incident 2 decades back. A little display case held things pulled from the tunnel over the years. A license plate, a radiator cap, a broken taillight, a rotary phone handset with its cord snipped short. Behind the counter sat a man with gray at the temples and a name tag someone had put through a printer 3 supervisors ago. He looked up with the pleasant blankness of someone ready to help, and not surprised by many things after midnight. "You get our detour?" he asked. "Center Bore's got a crew in it." He nodded. "North Bore ran fine," he said, and heard the understatement in his own voice. "Your 1,710 works." Voice kept it steady. He hesitated. "She said not to answer if I heard my name." The man's mouth tilted like someone fitting a key to a lock not used often. "She," he repeated, not correcting. "We run a loop we recorded a while back. The voice belongs to Kellerman, used to sit where I sit. Except he preferred nights deeper than this. Had a habit of saying exactly what people wanted to hear before they knew they needed it. He's been retired longer than you've been with your company." He half laughed at his own attempt to put it into daytime talk. The tunnel takes advantage of the tiles. Old sounds live a long time in there. Fans change pressure, and you get scraps of words that didn't belong to now. We tell folks to keep steady so they don't put their truck in the wall trying to answer anyone who isn't there. He poured coffee into a little paper cup in a way that suggested practice and slid it across the counter. "On the left in there, you might have seen our maintenance cart in the South Bore," he added like a mundane thing. "The reflection jumps the wall sometimes. Engineers tried to fix the geometry. Best solution so far is just to tell drivers it's there so the mind has a hook to hang it on." He set the coffee down with thanks and read the bulletin board without reading. A printed sheet with the tunnel logo at the top had this line: "North Bore phone test. Ring at station. 14 to 18. Do not answer while live traffic is present." Another flyer announced that the center bore's lights would be replaced next week, weather permitting. A photograph, newer than the construction ones but older than his phone, showed a line of silhouetted figures in hard hats and vests, standing under the north portal in a kind of accidental ceremony at dawn. Someone had handwritten on the margin, "Last night in the old ventilators, thank you." He asked because he was who he was. "Do you ever print tickets for the tunnel, like a log?" "We print incident tags," the man said. "No ticket. The toll's on the turnpike end." He reached under the counter and came up with a slip anyway. A paper the size of a bookmark with fields for time and lane and bore and reason. He clicked a pen and wrote the hour, then checked a box that said, "Night Operations Advisory." He slid it to him with a half apology. "Souvenir? If you want proof to staple to a story." He took it. The ink had that slight raised feel. The box for voice channel read 1,710. The bottom had a faint, almost invisible watermark of the tunnel's outline. It felt official enough to make his palms believe his head. On his way back out, he paused by the plaque at the portal. It thanked Cruz by name from a year before he was born. Someone had tucked a new coffee stirrer into the frame, a thing with no meaning, except that another person had stood there within the day and thought of their hands. He touched the brass lightly because he liked to mark his own passing through without taking anything. On the return run, just before dawn, the center bore reopened. The overhead signs in their reserved slow way blinked to arrows, and the AM band's recorded voice went back to telling weather and speed advice instead of talking to anyone. He took the newer tunnel, sang through its bright and quiet mile with one missable heartbeat in his ear. It felt fine. It felt like the road being the road. Weeks later, on a wet May night, when he had forgotten the specifics and kept only the shape of the experience, he found himself again in a tunnel far from there, the kind under a river, with ceramic tile and a voice that came from a different speaker. The sign told him to tune to an advisory, and he did. And a voice told him simple things in simple order. Dim, slow, keep to right, do not stop. He followed the list and did not make story where there wasn't one. In one recess, a phone rang, lonely and clean in the new air, and by then he had learned the weight of not answering. He did not need proof to believe. He did not need belief to be polite. When a place asked him for a number 3 to 8 instead of 40, he gave the place its number. When a voice told him not to look too long at the mirror in a tile room, he kept his eyes where his hands already knew to put them. The mountain ridge stayed standing over him. The line kept moving through. There was kindness in being told exactly how to pass through a difficult place. He let that kindness stand at the front of the cab, like an extra set of marker lights, steady, unhurried, enough. The road quiets now, the engine hum fading into a low whisper against the night. If you've made it this far, you've traveled through the long, dark miles where every shadow told its story, and every echo had a name. Let the noise of the world fall away and rest easy. The night has done its work. When dawn comes, the road will still be there, waiting for another story to begin. Until then, sleep well, traveler. The darkness has nothing left to say.